My name is Clara, 34 years old, and I was seconds away from signing a brutal divorce settlement that would leave me with nothing when my teenage daughter burst into the sterile conference room. She grabbed my wrist with a desperate grip, her eyes blazing with a fierce fury I had never seen before. "Mom, please do not sign that," she pleaded, her voice trembling but fierce. "But just give me exactly 3 days. The real show is about to begin." My soon-to-be ex-husband sat across the mahogany table with a smug smile, entirely unaware that the woman he was trying to discard was not the helpless victim he believed her to be. He had no idea his perfectly constructed life was built on a fragile foundation of lies, and his devastating downfall was already in motion. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to a toxic partner who underestimated your worth and tried to strip away your dignity. The air in the downtown corporate law office was incredibly sterile and suffocating. The massive room smelled strongly of expensive leather furniture and stale coffee, a perfectly fitting atmosphere for the cold death of a 15-year marriage. Harrison, the man I had given my youth to, sat across from me looking absolutely immaculate in his custom-tailored charcoal suit and silk tie. At 38 years old, he was a senior director at a top-tier private equity firm in Manhattan, a man who consistently measured his entire self-worth by the massive size of his quarterly bonuses and the exclusive prestige of his elite social circle. I sat quietly in my modest gray dress, perfectly playing the subservient role he had aggressively assigned me years ago, the unassuming, wonderfully unambitious wife who simply authenticated antique documents for a modest living. He arrogantly slid a thick, heavy stack of legal papers across the polished wood table. The finalized divorce settlement. I slowly scanned the crisp pages, my stomach tightening painfully with every single paragraph I read. It was a brilliant masterclass in sheer financial and emotional cruelty. Harrison was aggressively demanding full, unshared custody of our 14-year-old daughter, Lily, claiming I was an unfit role model. He wanted to legally force me out of our comfortable suburban home, immediately offering me a completely laughable alimony of just $1,500 a month. In a major city where rent for a basic rundown apartment cost double that amount, it was a very clear, deliberate message. He wanted to financially ruin me and leave me begging on the streets. "You need to be realistic and practical about this," Clara Harrison said coldly, leaning back in his expensive leather chair with a deeply arrogant sigh. "I need a modern partner who can actually keep up with me, someone who naturally belongs in my high society world. Your complete lack of ambition is incredibly suffocating to a man of my stature. You are perfectly content examining dusty, irrelevant old papers all day in your small office while I am actively closing massive corporate deals worth hundreds of millions of dollars. We simply do not fit together anymore. Lily needs a luxurious home that reflects immense success, not your depressing mediocrity." His cruel words were intentionally designed to break my spirit completely, to make me feel incredibly small and entirely insignificant. For so many years, I had quietly endured his subtle daily jabs about my career, his constant annoying complaints that I did not care enough about exclusive country club memberships or buying expensive designer handbags. He genuinely thought I was weak and fragile. He firmly believed I would just break down and cry, sign the terrible papers without reading them, and fade quietly into total obscurity. But I did not shed a single tear. Instead, I calmly reached into my leather purse and pulled out a thick manila envelope. I opened it slowly and slid a glossy, high-definition photograph across the table, placing it deliberately directly over the signature line of his insulting settlement document. It was a clear picture taken just 2 weeks prior by an expensive private investigator I had secretly hired. The vivid image showed Harrison happily strolling through Central Park on a beautiful sunny Sunday afternoon. He was affectionately holding hands with Gwen, a stunning 29-year-old socialite he had supposedly met at a charity gala last year. But the absolute most damning part of the photo was the happy 4-year-old boy sitting joyfully on Harrison's broad shoulders. A little boy named Leo, his secretly hidden son. I fully expected immediate panic. I expected him to turn pale, to stutter nervously, to offer some pathetic, rambling excuse, or desperately beg for my continued silence. But Harrison merely glanced down at the revealing photograph and let out a short, incredibly dismissive laugh that chilled my blood. "So you finally figured it all out," he said smoothly, without a single trace of guilt or remorse in his cold voice. "I suppose it saves me the tedious trouble of explaining everything to you. Yes, that beautiful woman is Gwen. And yes, little Leo is my biological son. Since you already know the whole truth, you should easily understand exactly why you need to sign those legal papers today. Gwen comes from real generational wealth. Her prestigious family has deep history, powerful connections, and massive influence. She is exactly the kind of sophisticated woman a man in my prominent position desperately needs. She naturally belongs in the elite circles I operate in daily. You are just a temporary starter wife, Clara. It is completely time for you to step aside gracefully and let me finally live the grand life I was always meant to have." His sheer unapologetic audacity was truly breathtaking. He was not apologizing at all for carrying on a deceitful double life for nearly half a decade. He was actively weaponizing his painful betrayal, using his own infidelity as twisted proof that I was somehow grossly inadequate as a wife. He looked at me with cold, calculating, dead eyes, practically daring me to challenge his absolute authority. Disgust washed over my entire body, feeling thick and suffocating like toxic smoke. Looking at this heartless man, the biological father of my only daughter, I felt an overwhelming, desperate urge to just be permanently rid of him and his lies. The dreadful thought of dragging this ugly mess through a public family court, of subjecting poor Lily to a drawn-out, highly publicized, ugly battle over custody and shared assets made me physically ill to my stomach. I just wanted him completely out of my life forever. I wanted the suffocating toxicity gone for good. "Fine," I whispered softly, reaching my hand forward for the heavy, expensive silver pen his smug lawyer had provided on the desk. "If you truly want out this badly, then take it all." I carefully positioned the sharp tip of the pen over the thick paper, ready to completely surrender to his terrible demands, just to permanently escape the waking nightmare. But right before the dark ink could actually touch the white page, the heavy, solid oak door of the large conference room burst open violently. Lily rushed inside the room, breathing heavily and sweating, her heavy school backpack slipping awkwardly off her right shoulder. She must have taken a fast cab straight from her high school campus. Harrison stood up instantly, his face flushing deep red with immediate, uncontrollable anger at the sudden interruption. "What on earth are you doing here?" he demanded loudly, slamming his large hand down hard on the polished table. "This is a private adult conversation. Go wait out in the lobby immediately." Lily ignored his loud commands completely. She bravely bypassed her angry father as if he were entirely invisible and marched straight over to my side. Hot tears were pooling quickly in her bright eyes, but her small jaw was set with a fierce, unwavering determination that perfectly mirrored my own hidden internal strength. She grabbed my wrist tightly, stopping the silver pen just inches from the dotted signature line. "Mom, please do not sign that paper," she said loudly, her young voice shaking slightly, but incredibly resolute. "I know exactly what he is doing to us. I know all about her and the boy. Just give me exactly 3 days. Please, Mom, trust me. The real show is about to finally begin." Harrison scoffed loudly, stepping forward and moving aggressively to grab Lily by the arm. "Stop being so incredibly dramatic and go wait outside right now." I stood up instantly, firmly blocking his physical path, my eyes locking fiercely onto his with a dangerous, icy calm that made him pause. "Do not ever touch her," I warned him in a low, deadly tone. I took a deep breath of the damp office air and looked down gently at my brave daughter. She gave me a tiny, imperceptible, reassuring nod. I dropped the heavy silver pen directly onto the table. It clattered loudly and satisfyingly against the hard wood surface. "We will thoroughly review these legal documents and get back to you eventually," I told Harrison, coldly grabbing my purse and tightly holding Lily's trembling hand. We walked confidently out of the sterile office together, our heads held high, leaving him standing there shouting empty, pathetic threats that echoed uselessly behind us down the long hallway. As we finally reached the concrete echoing silence of the underground parking garage, my cell phone vibrated sharply in my coat pocket. This was the ultimate betrayal. It was an automated, urgent fraud alert directly from my primary bank. Harrison had just maliciously drained our joint savings account of exactly $120,000, leaving a zero balance. He wanted war, and he was going to get one. My heart pounded heavily in my chest, fueling a burning desire for absolute justice. I looked at Lily, squeezed her hand tightly, and smiled a grim, calculating smile as we stepped out into the bright city sunlight. Inside the heavy steel doors of my luxury SUV, the loud city noise instantly vanished. The thick tinted windows wrapped us in a quiet cocoon of perfect privacy. I settled into the driver's seat, gripping the smooth leather steering wheel. The digital dashboard illuminated, displaying the terrifying alert from my bank one more time. $120,000. Gone. A normal woman facing a sudden divorce would be completely paralyzed by that massive financial loss. She would be hysterically crying, desperately calling her lawyer, begging for a temporary restraining order on the shared assets, or wondering how she would pay her mortgage and feed her teenage daughter. Harrison heavily relied on that exact predictable reaction. He genuinely believed that taking that money would completely break my spirit, forcing me to crawl back to his law office and sign away my dignity for a few pathetic crumbs of alimony. He wanted me trapped, starving, and entirely submissive to his arrogant demands. He severely underestimated the woman he married. I calmly swiped the notification away and tossed the phone into the cup holder. I did not shed a single tear over the stolen funds. To Harrison, that money represented total control over my life. To me, it was merely pocket change. He firmly believed I was just a simple, unmotivated document reviewer, a boring wife who spent her days staring at old pieces of paper with a magnifying glass. He loved telling his wealthy friends that my job was a cute little hobby to keep me busy while he conquered the high-stakes financial world. That carefully constructed lie was the greatest shield I ever built. The real truth was far more dangerous. My work in document authentication had led me to develop a revolutionary machine learning algorithm. 8 years ago, I secretly coded and patented a cutting-edge artificial intelligence verification software. It was designed to detect microscopic anomalies in historical documents, analyzing ink composition, paper fiber decay, and signature pressure points with absolute flawless precision. My proprietary software was not just a fun hobby, it was the heavily guarded industry standard. Top-tier Wall Street investment banks, elite global auction houses, and exclusive private collectors paid exorbitant licensing fees to use my technology before executing any high-value transactions involving rare manuscripts or historical artifacts. I operated the entire enterprise through a complex network of anonymous corporate entities and offshore trusts. I was a hidden multimillionaire possessing a massive fortune that easily dwarfed Harrison's impressive private equity salary. He had absolutely no idea. I kept my wealth entirely concealed, quietly paying off our suburban home's mortgage through an anonymous holding company, observing his extreme arrogance grow while I silently amassed a formidable financial empire in the dark. Now he had declared war. I reached into the hidden compartment beneath the center console and pulled out my encrypted military-grade laptop. I powered it on, bypassing the biometric security protocols with a quick fingerprint scan. The dark screen flickered to life, displaying a complex dashboard of global financial data. I needed to ensure my real wealth was entirely unreachable before his aggressive lawyers could start digging into my background. I quickly accessed the master control panel for my offshore trust accounts. With a few rapid keystrokes, I initiated the primary lockdown sequence. I triggered the red alert protocol. Instantly, every single corporate asset, every hidden bank account, and every intellectual property license tied to my name was completely frozen and shifted into heavily encrypted blind trusts. Harrison's financial tentacles were long, but my digital fortress was entirely impenetrable. He could search for decades and never find a single trace of my hidden millions. The trap was set, and my assets were flawlessly protected. I closed the laptop and turned my attention to my daughter. Lily sat quietly in the passenger seat, Her school uniform slightly wrinkled her eyes bright with intense intelligence. She was only 14, but she possessed a brilliant analytical mind that rivaled top engineers. She had watched me silently secure my empire without asking a single question. Now it was her turn to speak. "Why 3 days, Lily?" I asked calmly, my voice steady and completely void of panic. "What exactly is happening in 72 hours?" Lily unzipped her heavy canvas backpack and pulled out her silver iPad. Her fingers flew across the glass screen, pulling up a series of highly classified corporate documents, internal memos, and secure financial spreadsheets. She had completely bypassed the security firewalls of Harrison's home office network. While he was busy carrying on his deceitful double life with Gwen and their secret son, his supposedly helpless teenage daughter had been quietly monitoring his every digital move. He left his primary work laptop unlocked on his desk 2 nights ago, Lily explained, her young voice dripping with cold, calculated precision. He was busy taking a lengthy phone call from Gwen in the backyard. I accessed his private equity firm's shared drive and downloaded his entire active project folder. "Mom, you need to see this immediately. He is not just trying to force a fast divorce so he can run away with his new family. He is desperately rushing because he needs your legal signature out of the way before his firm closes the biggest financial deal of his entire career." She handed the glowing iPad across the console. I took it, scanning the densely packed corporate files. The primary document was a massive merger agreement. Harrison's private equity firm was orchestrating a high-stakes acquisition of a rival global investment group. The sheer scale of the transaction was staggering. It was a $500 million merger. Harrison was listed as the lead director, the sole architect of the entire acquisition. If this deal successfully closed, his personal commission and guaranteed equity shares would instantly make him a billionaire. It was the crowning achievement he had been aggressively chasing his entire life. "Look at the scheduled closing date," Lily instructed, pointing a slender finger at the top right corner of the digital document. I checked the highlighted date. The formal signing ceremony was scheduled to take place in exactly 72 hours. 3 days. That was the precise reason he was so incredibly desperate to finalize our divorce this afternoon. He wanted me completely removed from his legal and financial profile before this massive wealth materialized. He intended to cut me out with a pitiful $1,500 monthly allowance while he walked away with hundreds of millions to shower upon Gwen and Leo. The sheer breathtaking greed of his strategy was almost impressive. But Lily was not finished. She swiped the screen to reveal the next file. "A massive merger like this requires substantial collateral," she explained, sounding more like a seasoned financial analyst than a high school freshman. "His firm needs to guarantee a massive line of credit to secure the necessary acquisition funds." The rival investment group demanded an airtight collateral portfolio before they would even consider signing the final merger agreement. "Look at what he is using to guarantee the $500 million loan." I stared at the screen, my eyes widening as I read the detailed asset inventory. Harrison was not using standard corporate bonds, real estate holdings, or traditional liquid assets to secure the loan. He was leveraging a massive privately held portfolio of rare historical documents. The inventory list included supposedly undiscovered letters from founding fathers, original drafts of historical treaties, and extremely rare 18th century financial charters. The estimated appraisal value of this private collection was listed at an astronomical sum, carefully calculated to cover the massive credit line required for the merger. Where exactly did he get a historical portfolio of this magnitude? I asked, my professional instincts instantly kicking in. I know every major collector in this industry. A portfolio this significant does not just appear out of nowhere without serious authentication and public market awareness. Lily smiled, a sharp, dangerous smile that mirrored my own. She swiped to the final document on her iPad. It was a corporate registration file for a secretive shell company buried beneath layers of complex limited liability corporations. He did not buy them from a legitimate collector, Lily said, her voice dropping to a low, triumphant whisper. He generated them. I tracked the origin of the portfolio to a newly formed holding company. The primary director and sole registered owner of that holding company is Gwen. His mistress is completely running a shadow corporation designed to manufacture fake historical assets. The profound realization hit me like a physical strike. The breath caught in my throat as the massive interconnected web of his deception became brilliantly clear. Harrison was not just an arrogant, cheating husband trying to discard his boring wife. He was an active, high-level corporate criminal. He was aggressively using Gwen's shell company to forge a massive portfolio of fake historical documents. He was intentionally leveraging those worthless counterfeit papers as legitimate collateral to fraudulently secure a $500 million corporate merger. If the rival investment group accepted the collateral and signed the contract, Harrison would commit federal wire fraud on an unprecedented catastrophic scale. This was his ultimate master plan. He believed he was completely untouchable. He firmly believed his intricate web of corporate shell companies would mask the massive forgery ring. He confidently assumed the rival investment group would simply accept the preliminary appraisals without conducting a microscopic deep-level verification of the historical collateral. He thought he could finalize his divorce, abandon his family, secure his massive billionaire status, and live happily ever after with his new elite society wife and their secret child. He was so incredibly close to getting away with the perfect crime. He had perfectly calculated every single variable, every minor risk, and every potential obstacle. He had accounted for everything except one tiny fatal detail. He had absolutely no idea what his wife actually did for a living. He had no idea that the hidden software empire I quietly built was the exact technology the global financial market relied upon to catch exactly this type of fraud. The trap was set, and the countdown had officially begun. Section 3, 1,500 words. We sat in the heavy, insulated silence of the SUV, the bright glow of the iPad illuminating Lily's focused face. I gently took the silver device from her hands and began meticulously scrolling through the incredibly dense, complicated legal jargon of the master merger agreement. Harrison had always been aggressively meticulous about his high-stakes corporate deals, treating every single financial contract like a brutal battlefield where he had to be the absolute victor. But looking closely at these highly classified files, I realized this was not just a standard corporate battle. It was a massive, highly coordinated financial execution built entirely on a foundation of breathtaking deception. The sheer scale of his fraudulent ambition was absolutely staggering to witness. He was actively attempting to secure a massive $500 million commercial credit line using fabricated ink on artificially aged parchment. If this monumental merger went through based on the counterfeit collateral provided by Gwen's shady shell company, it would not just be a simple civil breach of contract. It would instantly constitute severe federal wire fraud, massive corporate embezzlement, and a direct blatant violation of rigorous Securities and Exchange Commission regulations. The mandatory federal prison sentence for a financial crime of this unprecedented magnitude was decades long. Harrison was recklessly risking his entire elite career, his highly prized social standing, and his absolute freedom, all to fund a lavish secret life with a mistress he foolishly believed was his golden ticket into old money circles. He firmly thought he was completely untouchable. He genuinely believed his expensive Ivy League education and prestigious private equity title made him the absolute smartest man in any given room. That blinding, unchecked arrogance was his ultimate fatal vulnerability. He never bothered to look closely at the tedious fine print of the acquiring mega corporation's strict due diligence protocols. He assumed the legal verification process was just a minor bureaucratic hurdle that his aggressive legal team could easily bulldoze through. He was incredibly wrong. If he had actually paid attention to the mandatory compliance clauses, he would have instantly realized he was walking directly into a lethal, inescapable trap. I instructed Lily to pull up the specific compliance addendums attached to the massive master merger file. The acquiring entity was Vanguard Global Holdings, a notoriously conservative investment behemoth known globally for leaving absolutely nothing to chance. They demanded rigorous, uncompromising third-party verification for any non-traditional assets used as collateral in their acquisitions. My eyes quickly scanned the long, detailed list of approved vendors and mandatory compliance contractors required by Vanguard. There were standard commercial real estate appraisers, aggressive forensic accountants, and specialized corporate liability auditors. Then, buried deeply on page 47 of the dense compliance addendum, I found exactly what I was desperately looking for. I located the specific mandatory vendor exclusively assigned to verify the historical document portfolio Harrison was using to back his massive fraud. The vendor listed in bold black ink was Veritech Archival Solutions. It was the public-facing corporate name of my primary artificial intelligence authentication firm. I stared at the bright screen, reading the familiar name over and over again until the letters blurred. A slow, chilling smile spread across my face as the profound realization settled into my bones. The absolute undeniable irony of the situation was almost beautifully poetic. Harrison had meticulously plotted to discard me like obsolete garbage to secure his shiny new billionaire status, completely unaware that his entire future depended entirely on my proprietary technology. He was actively submitting his forged documents to a rigorous digital gatekeeper that I had personally designed, coded, and controlled from the ground up. Vanguard Global Holdings had hired my exact company to run the definitive microscopic analysis on Gwen's fake historical papers. Harrison truly thought he was submitting his fraudulent portfolio to an anonymous, faceless tech firm located somewhere in Silicon Valley. He had absolutely no idea that the brilliant founder and anonymous chief executive officer of that elite verification company was the very same wife he was trying to leave destitute with a pathetic alimony offer. He was unknowingly handing me the exact weapon I needed to completely destroy his life. I opened my encrypted, military-grade laptop again and rapidly accessed my secure internal company network. I needed to see the active workflow queue for Veritech Archival Solutions immediately. I bypassed the standard employee web portals and securely entered the hidden executive dashboard using my biometric authentication. Sure enough, a massive, heavily encrypted data packet labeled Vanguard Merger Collateral Portfolio had been successfully uploaded to our secure servers exactly 12 hours ago. Harrison's eager legal team had confidently submitted high-resolution microscopic scans of the entire counterfeit collection, completely certain that their sophisticated forgery techniques would easily pass a standard digital review. But my artificial intelligence software did not perform standard reviews. It relentlessly analyzed chemical degradation patterns in the ink. It mathematically cross-referenced the microscopic weave of the paper fibers against a massive global database of historical manufacturing techniques. It evaluated the precise pressure points of every single signature, detecting the tiny, invisible hesitations that inevitably occur when a forger attempts to perfectly replicate a historical autograph. No human eye could catch these microscopic anomalies, but my machine learning algorithm was utterly flawless. I watched the bright blue progress bar on my dashboard slowly advancing. The intense, deep-level scan of Harrison's submitted portfolio was currently running in real time. The powerful system was actively processing thousands of high-resolution images, instantly comparing them against centuries of authenticated historical data. I sat perfectly still in the driver's seat, listening to the quiet hum of the city outside my insulated vehicle, feeling a profound sense of absolute control wash over me. For 15 long years, Harrison had aggressively dictated every single aspect of my daily life. He rigidly controlled our family finances, our social calendar, and the false narrative of our supposedly perfect marriage. Now I controlled his ultimate fate. Suddenly, a sharp, flashing red notification illuminated the dark screen of my encrypted laptop. It was a highly secure priority message from Omar, my brilliant lead developer and chief technology officer. Omar was the only person at the company who knew my true identity and my direct involvement in the daily operations. The message was marked with the highest possible urgency flag. I quickly clicked the encrypted icon to open the secure communication channel. "Clara, we have a massive critical failure on the Vanguard Global Holdings account," Omar wrote, his text appearing in bright green letters against the black background. The artificial intelligence just completed the primary deep-level scan of the historical collateral portfolio submitted by the private equity firm. The results are a complete, unmitigated bloodbath. The algorithm has flagged the entire collection as definitively fraudulent. I continued reading Omar's urgent report, absorbing the highly technical details of Gwen's miserable failure. The chemical composition of the ink on the 18th century charters contains modern synthetic polymers. The paper fiber aging process was artificially accelerated using chemical washes that the software instantly detected. The signatures show clear mathematical evidence of modern tracing techniques. The entire portfolio is 100% counterfeit. There is not a single authentic document in the entire collection. It is a highly coordinated forgery ring. The absolute confirmation of the massive fraud sent a thrilling jolt of pure adrenaline straight through my veins. The trap had slammed completely shut. The flawless evidence was now permanently logged securely in my private corporate servers, fully backed by the infallible reputation of the global financial industry's most trusted verification software. Harrison had officially crossed the permanent line from arrogant, cheating husband to a massive federal corporate criminal. He had freely handed me the absolute power to dictate the precise terms of his total destruction. Omar's encrypted message continued urgently seeking my final executive authorization on the matter. Standard company protocol dictates that we immediately trigger the automatic fail response. We are legally obligated to instantly notify Vanguard Global Holdings that the collateral is entirely fraudulent. This will automatically terminate the $500 million merger deal today and likely trigger a massive federal investigation into the private equity firm. Do I have your authorization to send the critical failure report to the Vanguard Board of Directors right now? My finger hovered gently over the sleek keyboard. Triggering the immediate failure protocol would stop Harrison quietly in the shadows. He could potentially use his highly expensive corporate lawyers to aggressively mitigate the severe public fallout and effectively avoid the total public humiliation he absolutely deserved. He could quietly resign from his elite firm and successfully hide behind his vast network of wealthy colleagues. Harrison had publicly humiliated me in that cold law office just hours ago. He had arrogantly mocked my quiet career, deeply insulted my personal ambition, and tried to toss me into the harsh streets with nothing but a pathetic financial allowance. He had happily paraded his secret hidden family through Central Park, totally confident that his immense wealth and elite status made him entirely untouchable. Stopping him quietly in the dark shadows of a mundane corporate email chain was absolutely not justice. It was just standard business. I did not want business. I wanted a complete, totally unforgettable reckoning. I wanted him to vividly feel the exact agonizing moment his perfect, arrogant world completely shattered into a million tiny pieces. I wanted him to stand proudly in front of his elite peers, his wealthy corporate investors, and his snobbish new mistress, foolishly believing he had finally achieved ultimate financial victory, only to have it brutally ripped away in the most spectacular, incredibly public manner possible. I wanted the news cameras flashing brightly, the elite investors watching closely, and the federal authorities waiting patiently. I wanted to look him directly in his cold eyes, when the brilliant software he continually mocked as my cute little hobby officially destroyed his entire life. I stared at the glowing screen, my personal resolve hardening into solid, unbreakable steel. I began typing my response to Omar through the highly encrypted secure channel. My keystrokes were deliberate and loud, echoing firmly in the quiet, tense atmosphere of the luxury SUV. Lily leaned eagerly over the leather center console, watching the bright green text quickly appear on the dark monitor, her intelligent eyes reflecting the glowing light of the screen. No, I typed firmly, my executive command absolute and entirely unyielding. Do not trigger the automatic fail response today. Quarantine the final verification report in our secure offline servers. Approve the preliminary digital checklist so the massive transaction appears to be proceeding smoothly on their end. Let them finalize their legal preparations without any warnings. Let them print the massive corporate contracts. Let them invite the wealthy shareholders and the eager financial press to the event. Let him firmly believe he has perfectly executed the greatest financial triumph of his entire pathetic life. Let them proceed to the signing ceremony. I closed the laptop and let out a long, steady breath. The digital trap was securely locked in place. The next morning marked the first official day of our 72-hour countdown. I sat at my kitchen island calmly sipping black coffee when my cell phone vibrated violently against the marble countertop. The caller identification displayed the name Beatrice. My toxic mother-in-law rarely called me unless she needed to deliver a specific highly calculated insult or dictate a rigid family mandate. I answered the call, keeping my voice perfectly flat and emotionless. Clara. Beatrice began, immediately skipping any polite greeting. Her voice dripped with the signature aristocratic condescension she had perfected over decades. I am calling to remind you about the family engagement party tonight. Arrive precisely at 7 o'clock. Harrison informed me about your marriage, but until the ink is dry on those legal documents, you are still technically his wife. You will show up, you will smile pleasantly, and you will not dare embarrass my son in front of our esteemed guests. I took a slow sip of my coffee. I am currently dealing with some pressing matters, Beatrice. I do not think a party is appropriate right now. Beatrice let out a sharp, cold laugh. You do not have the luxury of thinking, Clara. You will attend. If you choose to throw a pathetic tantrum and skip this event, I will immediately contact my estate lawyers tomorrow morning. I will completely cut Lily out of the family trust fund. She will not receive a single dime for her college education or her future. You will not ruin Harrison's public image just because you failed to keep his interest. Do I make myself absolutely clear? I smiled at the empty kitchen. I understood perfectly. She was using my daughter's financial future as a blunt weapon to force my compliance. What Beatrice completely failed to realize was that Lily already had a massive offshore trust fund secured by my artificial intelligence empire. My daughter would never need a single penny of their dirty money. However, playing the submissive, defeated wife was essential to keeping Harrison completely blind to his impending destruction. I needed to maintain the illusion of my total powerlessness. I will be there at 7, I replied softly, injecting just enough fake defeat into my voice to satisfy her massive ego. See that you wear something respectable for once, Beatrice snapped before abruptly terminating the call. That evening, I walked into the grand ballroom wearing a simple, elegant navy blue dress. The massive room was heavily decorated with expensive white floral arrangements and dripping with crystal chandeliers. It was a classic display of the excessive wealth Harrison's family desperately loved to flaunt. Waiters in white jackets circulated with trays of champagne. The air hummed with the quiet chatter of New York's elite society. I navigated the crowded room, maintaining a perfectly composed expression, prepared to endure a few hours of family obligations. Then I saw them. The sheer, breathtaking audacity of the scene unfolding near the main bar actually made me pause in my tracks. Sitting on a plush velvet sofa, holding a crystal flute of expensive champagne, was Gwen. She looked absolutely radiant in a designer silk gown, her blonde hair perfectly styled. Sitting right next to her, playing happily with a silver dessert spoon, was little Leo. Harrison had not just brought his secret mistress and illegitimate son to a formal family engagement party. He had paraded them into the absolute center of the room. Standing directly over Gwen, fawning over her like she was visiting royalty, were Beatrice and Meredith. My mother-in-law and my snobbish sister-in-law were openly treating the woman who destroyed my marriage like the new highly exalted lady of the house. Beatrice was gently touching Gwen's arm, laughing brightly at something the younger woman said. Meredith was leaning, affectionately cooing at the 4-year-old boy. They knew. They had known all along. The ultimate disrespect washed over me. My husband's entire family was entirely complicit in his massive betrayal. They had actively welcomed his mistress and secret child into their elite fold while simultaneously treating me like disposable garbage. They eagerly embraced Gwen because her family supposedly possessed the old money pedigree that Beatrice constantly craved. I watched the sickening display of fake affection, feeling an icy, terrifying calm settle deep into my bones. Any lingering trace of guilt I might have felt about destroying this family completely vanished in that exact moment. They absolutely deserved every single ounce of the devastation coming their way. I slowly walked toward their seating area. I wanted to look them directly in the eyes. I wanted to memorize their smug, arrogant faces so I could perfectly recall this exact moment when the federal authorities finally slapped handcuffs on Harrison's wrists. As I approached the velvet sofa, Meredith spotted me. Her fake bright smile instantly dropped, replaced by a deep sneer of pure disgust. She nudged Beatrice, who turned around and glared at me with absolute contempt. Gwen simply took another sip of her champagne, looking at me with a mixture of pity and triumph. "Well, look who finally decided to show up," Meredith said loudly, her voice intentionally carrying over the quiet music. Her eyes slowly raked up and down my simple navy dress, her lip curling in revulsion. "I am honestly surprised they let you pass the front doors wearing that cheap rag, Clara. Did you buy that off a discount rack? You really should start getting used to wearing cheap clothes. I hear the tiny cramped studio apartments in the outer boroughs have very little closet space." Beatrice let out a harsh, approving chuckle. "Now, Meredith, be gentle. Clara is going to be facing a very harsh reality check soon. It takes time to adjust to living a mediocre life after temporarily enjoying our family's immense generosity." I stood perfectly still, letting their vicious, humiliating insults wash over me. I did not flinch. I did not break eye contact. I absorbed the brutal public humiliation without breaking my carefully constructed character. They desperately wanted a reaction. They wanted me to cry, to scream, to cause a massive scene so they could easily label me as the hysterical, unstable ex-wife. They wanted to firmly validate Harrison's cruel narrative. I absolutely refused to give them that satisfaction. Gwen shifted comfortably on the velvet cushions, casually resting her manicured hand on Leo's small shoulder. "You really must understand," Clara Gwen said, her voice dripping with fake sugary sweetness. "Harrison simply requires a partner who can truly elevate his prestigious brand. He is currently orchestrating a monumental financial merger. He needs a supportive wife who thoroughly understands the intense demands of upper echelon corporate finance, not someone who just stares at old documents all day. It is nothing personal. It is just basic economics. You simply lack the necessary pedigree to survive in our world." The profound ignorance of her statement almost made me laugh out loud. This woman, who was foolishly acting as the puppet director for a massive criminal forgery ring, was lecturing me about upper echelon corporate finance. She was actively facilitating a massive federal wire fraud scheme that would inevitably land her in a cold prison cell, yet she sat there sipping premium champagne, completely convinced of her own absolute superiority. She had no idea she was speaking to the hidden billionaire, whose proprietary artificial intelligence technology was currently holding her entire fraudulent existence hostage. "I am fully aware of basic economics, Gwen," I replied, my voice dangerously soft and perfectly measured. "I understand perfectly well how quickly high-risk investments can completely collapse when the underlying assets are exposed as entirely worthless. Sometimes the most expensive portfolios turn out to be nothing more than cheap fakes. You should always be careful about what you put your signature on." Gwen blinked twice, a brief, fleeting shadow of confusion crossing her perfectly contoured face. She clearly did not understand the heavy, lethal double meaning behind my words, but the sharp tone of my voice made her physically pull Leo a fraction closer to her side. Beatrice stepped forward aggressively, her eyes narrowing into angry slits, instantly moving to fiercely protect her precious new future daughter-in-law from my perceived disrespect. "How dare you speak to her that way?" Beatrice hissed venomously, pointing a heavily jeweled finger directly at my chest. "You are nothing but a pathetic failure, Clara. You failed to provide my son with a male heir. You failed to elevate his social standing, and you failed to secure your own future. Harrison is being incredibly generous by offering you any financial settlement at all. You should be dropping to your knees and begging him for mercy. Get out of this hotel right now, or I swear I will call the security guards to remove you." I looked at Beatrice, letting her empty threat hang in the chilled air between us. Her powdered face was flushed with ugly anger, her chest heaving as she waited for me to finally break down and cry. I did not give her the satisfaction. Instead, I offered her a polite, hollow smile that dismissed her manufactured authority. I turned on my heel and walked away from the velvet sofa, leaving my mother-in-law, my sister-in-law, and my husband's mistress sitting together in their toxic little circle. I navigated through the bustling ballroom, dodging waiters carrying silver trays and wealthy guests draped in diamonds. The heavy scent of expensive perfume and the loud laughter of the elite crowd made the large room feel suffocating. I desperately needed a moment of silence to compose my thoughts. I slipped through a pair of heavy wooden swinging doors that led into a secluded service hallway located just off the catering kitchen. The sudden silence of the service corridor was a massive relief. The bright fluorescent lights illuminated the spotless stainless steel counters and stacked catering equipment. I leaned against the cool tile wall, closing my eyes and taking a deep, stabilizing breath. I had successfully survived the initial confrontation without breaking my carefully constructed facade. "You handled those vipers better than anyone else ever could." I opened my eyes instantly. Standing just a few feet away in the quiet hallway was Jamal. At 40 years old, my brother-in-law was a deeply imposing figure, tall and broad-shouldered, wearing a perfectly tailored charcoal tuxedo that looked far sharper than anything Harrison ever wore. Jamal was Meredith's husband, and like me, he was a permanent outsider in this incredibly hostile family. He was a brilliant African-American man who worked as a senior risk manager at a massive international bank. He possessed a terrifyingly sharp financial mind, capable of predicting market collapses and identifying corporate liabilities long before anyone else noticed the warning signs. Yet despite his undeniable brilliance and his massive corporate salary, the family treated him with polite, thinly veiled contempt. Beatrice constantly subjected him to horrible microaggressions about his background. Harrison routinely dismissed his expert financial advice at dinner parties, arrogant enough to believe that a private equity director was inherently superior to a risk manager. Even his own wife, Meredith, treated Jamal more like a convenient socially progressive accessory than an actual, equal partner in their marriage. Jamal and I had always shared a quiet, unspoken solidarity. We were the designated targets, the unfortunate spouses who were never truly welcomed into the elite's snobbish inner circle. We survived family holidays by exchanging silent, knowing glances across the dining table whenever Beatrice launched into one of her arrogant monologues. "Thank you, Jamal," I replied softly, offering him a genuine, tired smile. "I am honestly surprised Beatrice has not sent her security guards back here to physically throw me out into the street." Jamal let out a deep, rumbling chuckle, walking closer and leaning against the metal counter beside me. "Beatrice only barks when she has an audience to impress," he said, his dark eyes studying my face with intense, calculating precision. "She needs her wealthy friends to see her aggressively defending her son. Out here in the service hallway, she has zero power." "But I did not follow you back here to discuss your mother-in-law's terrible social habits, Clara. I followed you because we need to have a very serious, highly confidential conversation." I straightened my posture, instantly sensing the heavy shift in his tone. Jamal was not a man who engaged in idle gossip. When he spoke, it was always deliberate and highly strategic. "What is going on?" I asked, matching his serious demeanor. Jamal crossed his arms over his broad chest, glancing quickly over his shoulder toward the swinging wooden doors to ensure we were completely alone. "Harrison has been acting incredibly erratic over the past few weeks," he began, his deep voice dropping to a cautious, hushed whisper. "I have watched him aggressively push this massive $500 million merger forward at a highly dangerous, totally reckless speed. He is deliberately bypassing standard corporate compliance protocols, actively ignoring his legal team's advice, and shutting out his own senior partners. He acts like a desperate man running out of time." I kept my expression perfectly neutral, carefully guarding the massive secret I held regarding the forged historical documents. "Harrison is an arrogant man," I replied smoothly. "He firmly believes he is the smartest person in the financial sector. He probably thinks standard rules simply do not apply to him anymore." "Arrogance explains bad manners," Clara Jamal countered sharply, his dark eyes locking onto mine with absolute piercing clarity. "It does not explain massive systemic financial irregularities." My heart skipped a sudden beat. "What kind of financial irregularities?" I asked, stepping slightly closer to him in the quiet corridor. Jamal reached into the pocket of his tailored tuxedo jacket. "I manage risk for a living, Clara," he said, his voice deadly serious. "My entire career is dedicated to looking at massive sets of numbers and instantly spotting the tiny hidden anomalies that indicate a catastrophic failure is imminent. I see the dangerous variables that other people completely ignore, and right now, this entire family is a massive, rapidly sinking ship." He pulled his hand out of his pocket, Resting in the center of his large palm was a tiny black micro USB drive. He held it out toward me. I have been quietly looking into Harrison's personal and professional accounts, Jamal explained, his eyes never leaving mine. I noticed massive unexplained capital outflows from his primary private equity funds. He has been aggressively moving enormous amounts of money through a highly complex, heavily obscured network of offshore holding companies. But that is not even the worst part, Clara. He is not just funneling his corporate money, he is actively moving money that belongs to Beatrice and Meredith. I stared at the tiny digital storage device in his hand, feeling a sudden intense wave of profound shock. Harrison was not just committing federal corporate fraud with Gwen's fake historical documents. He was actively embezzling money from his own deeply devoted mother and his fiercely loyal sister. The sheer, unadulterated evil of his actions was staggering. He was bankrupting the very same toxic women who were currently out in the ballroom celebrating his mistress and his secret child. "Why are you giving this to me?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Why not take this information directly to the federal authorities or tell your wife?" Jamal let out a bitter, exhausted sigh. "Meredith is completely blinded by her loyalty to her brother and her mother," he said, a heavy sadness briefly crossing his handsome face. "If I try to show her this data, she will instantly accuse me of trying to sabotage her family. She will run straight to Harrison, and he will bury the evidence before the authorities can even open a formal investigation. As for the authorities, a sudden anonymous tip from a disgruntled brother-in-law might be easily dismissed. But you, Clara, you are his wife. You are currently in the middle of a highly contentious, incredibly hostile divorce. You have the legal standing to demand a forensic accounting of his assets during the discovery phase. You can legally subpoena these exact records and force everything out into the bright, unforgiving daylight." He stepped forward and firmly pressed the tiny micro USB drive directly into the palm of my hand. I quickly closed my fingers around the hard plastic, feeling the immense weight of the digital evidence. "Take it," Jamal insisted. "I need to protect myself, and you need to protect Lily." I slipped the drive securely into the hidden pocket of my purse. Without knowing anything about the fake historical collateral or my hidden artificial intelligence empire, he had successfully uncovered the massive money laundering operation supporting Harrison's fraud. He handed me the exact financial roadmap I needed to completely decimate Harrison's existence. "Thank you, Jamal," I whispered fiercely. "I promise you I will make sure he pays for everything he has done." Jamal offered me a sharp smile. "I know you will, Clara," he replied. "You have always been the smartest person in this terrible family." Suddenly, the heavy wooden swinging doors burst open. Harrison stood in the doorway, his tall frame completely blocking the exit. He looked furious, his chest heaving as his cold, predatory
"What exactly
eyes
is going
darted
on back here?"
suspiciously
Harrison demanded loudly.
Jamal calmly ignored him. "Have a good evening, Clara," he said, walking past Harrison. Harrison turned his furious attention onto me. "You are coming with me right now," he hissed viciously, grabbing my upper arm. "We are going to the private study upstairs for a highly private chat about your immediate future starting right now." Harrison's fingers dug painfully into the fabric of my navy dress as he marched me toward the grand staircase. I walked with my spine straight, refusing to give the hovering guests any satisfying spectacle to gossip about. We ascended the sweeping marble steps in heavy silence. He practically shoved me through the mahogany doors of the private upstairs study, slamming them shut behind us. The room was a dark cave of masculine wealth. Floor-to-ceiling wooden bookshelves lined the walls. A massive oak desk heavily dominated the center of the space. Harrison paced behind the desk like a caged predator, running his hands through his perfectly styled hair, his face twisted in a mask of righteous indignation. He was breathing heavily, trying to regain the absolute control he felt slipping through his fingers. "You really thought you could just waltz in here and disrespect my family?" he spat, turning to glare at me. "You think parading around in that cheap dress and staring down my mother makes you look strong. It just makes you look incredibly pathetic, Clara." I stood near the center of the Persian rug, clutching my purse tightly. Inside that purse rested the micro USB drive Jamal had just given me, a tiny digital bomb carrying the coordinates of Harrison's impending financial ruin. I kept my face blank, projecting the image of the meek, defeated wife he expected to see. I did not say a word. My silence only infuriated him further. He wanted me to argue. He wanted me to scream and cry so he could dismiss me as a hysterical woman who could not handle the painful reality of a failed marriage. When I refused to take the bait, Harrison seamlessly transitioned into his favorite psychological weapon. The masterclass in gaslighting began. He let out a long, theatrical sigh, leaning against the edge of the oak desk and crossing his arms. He arranged his facial features into an expression of deep, manufactured pity. "I honestly did not want it to happen this way, Clara," he said, his voice suddenly dropping to a soft, manipulative cadence. "I never actually wanted to hurt you. But you forced my hand. You left me with absolutely no other choice." I raised a single eyebrow. "I forced you to carry on a secret affair for 5 years and father an illegitimate child," I asked, my voice deadly calm. Harrison did not flinch. "Yes," he replied smoothly without a single ounce of hesitation. "You did. You completely refused to grow with me. When I started climbing the corporate ladder at the private equity firm, I desperately needed a partner who could effortlessly navigate high society. I needed a wife who understood the critical importance of elite networking, someone who could host massive charity galas and entertain billionaire investors with natural grace. Instead, you stubbornly clung to your boring, irrelevant little job authenticating old pieces of paper. You intentionally embarrassed me in front of my prestigious colleagues with your complete lack of ambition and your refusal to adapt to my elevated world." He stepped closer, looming over me, trying to use his physical size to intimidate me into submission. "Gwen was born into this elite echelon," he continued, his eyes cold and calculating. "She understands the intense pressures of managing massive wealth. She naturally knows how to support a man of my monumental stature. You isolated yourself, Clara. You built a massive wall of stubborn mediocrity around yourself, and you expected me to just sit there in the dark with you. I am a highly successful man. I have massive needs. Gwen simply provided the sophisticated companionship and the high society pedigree that you completely failed to deliver. You essentially handed me over to her. This entire situation is entirely your fault." His ability to completely invert reality was truly terrifying. He was actively blaming his calculated infidelity on my supposed failure to attend enough snobbish cocktail parties. He was characterizing his 5-year campaign of deception and his secret child as a natural, unavoidable consequence of my modest career choices. He wanted me to internalize all the blame, to feel so overwhelmingly guilty and fundamentally inadequate that I would just quietly accept whatever terrible scraps he decided to throw my way. I stared at him, marveling at the sheer depth of his narcissistic delusion. He had entirely convinced himself that he was the tragic victim of a disappointing marriage rather than the ruthless architect of a massive fraud. He firmly believed his own toxic lies. I nodded slowly, maintaining my perfectly neutral expression. "I am sure Gwen is extremely supportive of your massive financial ambitions," I said carefully, layering the hidden double meaning into my words. "I am sure she is perfectly willing to sign her name to absolutely anything you ask her to." Harrison smiled smugly, missing the lethal implication about Gwen's fraudulent shell company. "Exactly," he said, looking satisfied that I was apparently agreeing with his twisted logic. "She understands how to play the game. She understands how to win. And because you fundamentally do not understand how to win, Clara, you need to gracefully accept defeat." He walked behind the desk and opened a leather briefcase. He pulled out a thick stack of familiar legal documents. It was the exact same brutal divorce settlement he had pushed across the conference table at his law office earlier today. He tossed the heavy packet onto the desk. The loud thud echoed very sharply in the quiet study. "I am willing to be incredibly generous, Clara," he said, adopting the magnanimous tone of a benevolent king, pardoning a lowly peasant. "I know you are terrified of the future. I know you cannot possibly afford to survive in this city on your own meager income. So I have instructed my legal team to draft a special one-time offer. A compromise for the sake of avoiding a lengthy, embarrassing public spectacle." He tapped his manicured finger against the top page of the settlement. If you sign these finalized divorce papers tomorrow morning, and if you voluntarily surrender full uncontested legal custody of Lily to me, I will make sure you are not left entirely homeless. I will generously transfer the deed of our old suburban starter home directly into your name. You can have the house free and clear. You can retreat to the quiet suburbs, continue your little document reviewing hobby, and live out your mediocre life in peace. In exchange, Lily gets to stay with me and Gwen in the city, where she can benefit from Gwen's elite connections and attend the best private academies. It is the absolute best deal you are ever going to get, Clara. You walk away with a guaranteed roof over your head, and my daughter gets the high society future she actually deserves. He leaned across the desk, his eyes locking onto mine with intense predatory pressure. But this extremely generous offer expires tomorrow at noon. If you try to fight me in family court, I will use my massive legal resources to absolutely bury you. I will drag your mental state through the mud. I will financially bleed you dry until you cannot even afford a cheap motel room. You will lose Lily anyway, and you will end up completely destitute on the streets. Take the house, Clara. Sign the papers tomorrow and quietly walk away. I looked down at the thick stack of legal papers resting on the polished oak desk. Harrison was offering me the old suburban starter home we had purchased a decade ago, back when he was just a junior associate trying to build a respectable facade. He was dangling that modest property in front of me, like a massive prize, fully believing he held the ultimate power over my basic survival. He thought he was being a ruthless, brilliant negotiator. A slow, cold smile spread across my face. I could not suppress the deep, intoxicating wave of pure amusement that washed through my entire body. The absolute breathtaking irony of his arrogant trap was almost too perfect. Harrison thought he owned that suburban house. He thought the mortgage was held by a standard commercial bank that he could easily pay off with a fraction of his upcoming fraudulent merger bonus. He had absolutely no idea that 2 years ago, when the original lender sold a massive bundle of mortgages to a secondary financial market, I had quietly intercepted the transaction. Using a heavily obscured limited liability corporation funded entirely by my secret artificial intelligence software empire, I had aggressively purchased the remaining debt on that exact suburban property. I was the anonymous corporate entity holding the deed. I was the bank. I literally owned the actual roof over his head. I possessed the absolute legal power to foreclose on the property the instant he missed a single payment, which he inevitably would the second the federal authorities froze his assets for wire fraud. He was arrogantly trying to bribe me with a house I already secretly owned. I looked up from the legal documents and met his cold, predatory stare. My smile did not waver. It was a terrifyingly calm, perfectly controlled expression that finally made a tiny flicker of genuine uncertainty flash across his arrogant face. He expected tears. He expected begging. He expected me to instantly collapse under the crushing weight of his cruel ultimatum. Instead, I picked up my purse, feeling the solid weight of Jamal's USB drive safely tucked inside. I turned around and walked slowly toward the heavy mahogany doors, my heels clicking sharply against the hardwood floor. I grabbed the polished brass handle and pulled the heavy door open, letting the loud, overlapping chatter of the toxic engagement party below flood back into the quiet study. I looked back over my shoulder at the man whose entire fraudulent existence was rapidly counting down to a spectacular public destruction. I will most definitely think about it, I said very smoothly. I pulled the heavy mahogany door shut behind me, completely cutting off his arrogant, blustering voice. The grand staircase stretched downward into the glittering, toxic engagement party below. I found Lily waiting near the coat check, her eyes scanning the wealthy crowd with sharp vigilance. She immediately noticed the calm, steady rhythm of my footsteps and gave a tiny nod of approval. We walked out the front doors of the hotel without looking back, leaving the stifling atmosphere of fake smiles and aggressive social climbing entirely behind us. The cool night air felt incredibly refreshing against my skin. As we settled into the secure comfort of my vehicle, my phone buzzed briefly. It was a short, incredibly predictable text message from Harrison. He stated he would be staying at a luxury boutique hotel downtown with Gwen for the night, framing it as a necessary business retreat. I simply swiped the notification away. His absence was exactly what we needed to execute the next phase of our counteroffensive. We drove back to our quiet suburban house in total silence, the rhythmic hum of the engine providing a stark contrast to the chaotic deception we had just left behind. The house was completely dark when we arrived. I walked straight to my home office, pulling the heavy curtains shut and locking the heavy wooden door behind us. Lily immediately sat at the large desk booting up my secure, military-grade laptop. The biometric scanners glowed green, instantly recognizing my fingerprints and granting us full access to my encrypted network. I reached into my purse, my fingers brushing against the cold plastic of the micro USB drive Jamal had covertly slipped into my hand. I placed the tiny black device on the desk. It looked entirely unassuming, yet it held the massive, destructive power to completely decimate Harrison's carefully constructed world. Lily expertly connected the drive to a secure, isolated sandbox environment on the laptop. This rigorous security measure ensured that if Jamal's files contained any hidden tracking software or malicious malware, our primary financial network would remain utterly untouched. But Jamal was a meticulous risk manager. He had scrubbed the data perfectly clean, a series of highly organized, densely packed financial folders immediately popped onto the glowing screen. Jamal had spent months quietly compiling this massive trove of corporate intelligence, mapping out every single suspicious transaction, every hidden holding company, and every questionable offshore transfer linked to Harrison's private equity firm. It was a breathtaking masterpiece of forensic accounting. We opened the first master file, and the sheer scale of the deception instantly became clear. Jamal had tracked the complex flow of capital used to establish the mysterious shell company currently holding the forged historical documents. The corporate registration documents verified exactly what my artificial intelligence software had already suspected. Gwen was officially listed as the sole acting chief executive officer of the Shadow Corporation. She was the legally responsible puppet stationed at the very top of a massive criminal enterprise. Harrison had intentionally structured the entire forgery ring so that his mistress held all the direct legal liability if the federal authorities ever raided the shell company. Gwen's signature was on every single fraudulent invoice, every fake appraisal request, and every illegal wire transfer used to manufacture the counterfeit collateral. He was aggressively using her as a disposable human shield. Lily's fingers flew across the keyboard, rapidly cross-referencing the corporate banking statements Jamal had recovered. "Look at the initial seed capital, Mom," she said, her voice dropping to a low, shocked whisper. The forgery operation required massive upfront funding to purchase the antique paper hire, the specialized chemists to age the ink and bribe the corrupt preliminary appraisers. Harrison could not use his own private equity funds without alerting his senior partners or triggering automatic compliance audits. He had to source millions of dollars in clean, untraceable cash to jumpstart the criminal enterprise. I leaned closer to the bright screen, carefully tracking the complex web of domestic wire transfers Jamal had painstakingly unraveled. Harrison had aggressively routed the seed money through a series of anonymous domestic trusts before funneling it into Gwen's offshore accounts. I followed the digital paper trail backward, moving through layers of corporate obfuscation, determined to find the original source of the massive capital injection. When we finally reached the very bottom of the financial chain, my blood ran completely cold. The absolute breathtaking depravity of my husband's actions left me momentarily speechless. Harrison had not secured a secret bank loan. He had not borrowed money from dangerous underground lenders. He had systematically, ruthlessly embezzled the funds from his own family. The bank account routing numbers perfectly matched the private wealth management profiles belonging to Beatrice and Meredith. Harrison had abused his position as their trusted financial advisor, leveraging his total control over the family estate to quietly drain their accounts dry. I stared at the glowing spreadsheets in absolute horror and twisted fascination. Over the past 2 years, Harrison had aggressively liquidated Beatrice's entire primary retirement portfolio. He had forged her authorization signatures to sell off her secure municipal bonds, quietly transferring the massive proceeds into the Shadow Corporation to fund Gwen's lavish lifestyle and the sophisticated forgery ring. Beatrice firmly believed her massive wealth was safely compounding in conservative low-risk investments. In reality, her accounts were completely hollowed out, consisting of nothing but fabricated monthly statements Harrison generated to keep her entirely pacified. But he did not stop with his mother. The data clearly showed he had also targeted his own sister. Meredith possessed a massive, irrevocable trust fund inherited directly from her late grandparents. Harrison had exploited a tiny legal loophole in the trust administration protocols, utilizing his status as the primary portfolio manager to aggressively leverage Meredith's inheritance as hidden collateral for highly toxic short-term offshore loans. He had effectively gambled away her entire future to keep his criminal enterprise afloat. Jamal must have noticed these massive catastrophic discrepancies during a routine risk assessment of his wife's financial profile. That discovery had clearly prompted him to dig deeper into Harrison's shadow operations, ultimately leading him to uncover the entire sickening truth. The profound, devastating irony of the situation settled over me like a heavy, suffocating blanket. Just 2 hours ago, I had stood in that glittering hotel ballroom, silently absorbing vicious insults from Beatrice and Meredith. They had publicly mocked my modest dress, aggressively insulted my career, and proudly paraded Gwen around the room as the superior high society replacement. They had fiercely defended Harrison, firmly believing his immense corporate success guaranteed their continued elite status. They treated his mistress like visiting royalty, entirely convinced she was a prestigious addition to their wealthy bloodline. They had absolutely no idea that the arrogant man they were desperately protecting had completely bankrupted them. They were aggressively fawning over the exact woman whose designer silk gowns and luxury hotel suites were funded entirely by their stolen money. Gwen was wearing Beatrice's retirement fund on her wrist. She was drinking Meredith's inheritance from a crystal champagne flute. Harrison had ruthlessly sacrificed his own mother and sister to finance his desperate fraudulent climb to billionaire status. I sat back in my leather office chair, the sheer magnitude of the impending destruction washing over me. The situation had escalated far beyond a simple hostile divorce. This was no longer just about protecting Lily and securing my own financial independence. The public fallout from the $500 million merger collapse was going to be absolutely apocalyptic. When my artificial intelligence verification software exposed the historical collateral as entirely fraudulent on the day of the signing ceremony, the federal authorities would instantly freeze every single asset connected to Harrison's private equity firm. The ensuing federal investigation would aggressively tear through his corporate records like a massive hurricane. The forensic accountants from the Federal Bureau of Investigation would quickly discover the empty retirement accounts and the leveraged trust funds. They would expose the fact that Harrison had stolen millions from his own family to fund a federal wire fraud conspiracy. When the dust finally settled, Harrison would be facing decades in a federal penitentiary. Gwen would be criminally indicted as the puppet chief executive officer of the forgery ring, completely losing any chance of maintaining custody of young Leo. But the absolute most devastating collateral damage would fall directly onto Beatrice and Meredith. The federal government would seize whatever tiny scraps of money remained in their accounts to pay restitution to the defrauded investors. The elite snobbish society they valued above everything else would instantly turn their backs on them. They would be publicly exposed as penniless victims of their own golden child's criminal greed. The prestigious family name they constantly wielded like a weapon against me would become completely synonymous with massive corporate fraud and absolute financial ruin. The entire toxic bloodline was going to be systematically annihilated in front of the entire world. I looked at Lily, who was silently reading the final summary report on the glowing iPad. She slowly looked up at me, her intelligent eyes reflecting the harsh blue light of the screen. She fully understood the catastrophic implications of Jamal's data. She knew exactly what was going to happen to her grandmother and her aunt when the 72-hour countdown finally reached 0. He destroyed them. Lily whispered, her young voice echoing softly in the quiet, secure home office. He actually stole everything they had, and they are out there right now defending him. Yes, I replied, my voice steady and completely void of any lingering sympathy. He built an intricate house of cards using their stolen money, and he expects me to quietly take the blame when it all comes crashing down. He thinks my quiet departure will be the final step in securing his perfect fraudulent future. I reached out and gently closed the laptop, plunging the home office into darkness. The deep, heavy silence of the suburban house felt entirely different now. It was no longer a cage built by an oppressive marriage. It was a strategic command center. Harrison had drastically underestimated the devastating power of the truth. He had severely miscalculated the immense strength of the women he sought to destroy. He was currently sleeping comfortably in a luxury hotel downtown, completely certain he had successfully bullied me into submission. He thought the next 3 days would be a smooth, victorious march toward unprecedented billionaire wealth and ultimate power. He had no idea he was aggressively sprinting toward his own public execution. The countdown to the signing ceremony continued ticking away in the background. The massive corporate trap was perfectly primed, the federal evidence was securely cataloged, and the explosive truth was firmly in my hands. The entire family was proudly standing on a hidden landmine, and I was holding the only detonator. I would not warn them. I would not show them an ounce of mercy. I would simply let the timer run out and watch their entire toxic empire burn to ashes. The harsh morning sunlight filtered through the wide blinds of my home office, marking the definitive beginning of day 2 in our 72-hour countdown. I had barely slept, fueled entirely by a cold, calculating adrenaline that kept my mind incredibly sharp. At exactly 9 in the morning, the heavy brass knocker on the front door echoed aggressively through the quiet suburban house. I walked down the main hallway with slow, deliberate steps. I knew Harrison would not bother showing up in person today. He was far too busy preparing for his fraudulent $500 million merger to deal with the tedious reality of discarding his wife. He would send his corporate attack dogs instead. When I pulled the heavy wooden door open, 2 men in sharp, overly tailored gray suits stood on my front porch. They carried thick leather briefcases and wore identical expressions of practiced corporate hostility. They were junior partners from Harrison's ruthless legal team, men who specialized in intimidating vulnerable spouses into complete submission. They did not offer a polite greeting or extend their hands. The taller man simply shoved a thick manila envelope directly toward my chest. "Clara, we are here on behalf of Harrison," the man said, his voice dripping with rehearsed legal arrogance. "You are being officially served with an immediate eviction notice. You and your daughter have exactly 24 hours to completely vacate these premises. Harrison has formally rescinded his generous settlement offer from yesterday. The deed to this property is heavily tied up in his corporate assets and is currently being leveraged as secondary backing for an upcoming business acquisition. You have absolutely no legal right to remain on this property." I did not flinch or reach for the envelope. I simply let it fall onto the welcome mat at my feet. The sheer audacity of Harrison's strategy was fascinating to witness in real time. He was dropping the fake pretense of civility completely. Yesterday, he had dangled this exact house in front of me like a grand prize, hoping to bribe me into a fast, quiet divorce. Today, realizing I had not immediately crumbled and signed his terrible papers, he was resorting to blunt force trauma. He wanted to physically throw Lily and me out into the street, forcing us into a state of absolute desperation before his massive merger closed tomorrow. He firmly believed that if he made me homeless today, I would fiercely beg for mercy tomorrow. "If you refuse to vacate the premises by 9 tomorrow morning, we are legally authorized to have local law enforcement physically remove you for trespassing," the second lawyer added, puffing out his chest to look highly intimidating. "Do not make this any uglier than it already is. Pack your belongings and leave. Harrison has already frozen your joint bank accounts. So we highly suggest you call a cheap moving company while you can still afford one." They expected rapid tears. They expected me to fall to my knees, to scream wildly about fairness, to frantically beg them to call my husband so I could plead for my family home. They wanted a dramatic performance they could report back to Harrison to stroke his massive ego. I gave them absolutely nothing. I looked at both of them with a calm, terrifyingly flat expression that made the taller lawyer nervously shift his weight. "I completely understand the situation. I replied softly, my voice completely devoid of any panic or fear. You can tell Harrison he does not need to send the police tomorrow morning. We will not be staying here tonight. I closed the heavy front door firmly in their faces, leaving them standing confused on the porch. I turned around to find Lily standing at the bottom of the grand staircase. She was already wearing her dark winter coat, holding a sleek black suitcase by the handle. She had listened to the entire aggressive exchange through the cracked door, and her young face was set in a mask of pure, unbreakable resolve. She did not shed a single tear over losing her childhood home. She knew exactly what I knew. Harrison did not actually own this house. He was illegally attempting to evict me from a property that my anonymous artificial intelligence corporation completely owned. When the federal authorities seized his assets tomorrow, his fraudulent claim to this property would instantly evaporate into nothingness. Go grab your computer equipment, Lily, I instructed my daughter calmly. Pack only what you absolutely need for the next few days. We are not taking the heavy furniture. We are not taking the expensive art. We are leaving this massive museum of lies exactly as it is. I walked upstairs to the master bedroom for the final time. I did not waste a single moment looking at the expensive wedding photos or the luxurious decor that Harrison had meticulously curated to impress his wealthy peers. I pulled a single sturdy suitcase from the back of the walk-in closet. I packed my military-grade encrypted laptop, the vital micro USB drive containing Jamal's explosive financial data, my secure digital authentication tokens, and enough professional clothing to last through the upcoming corporate bloodbath. I packed exactly one suitcase for myself. I was not leaving as a defeated woman carrying the heavy baggage of a broken marriage. I was leaving as a highly lethal corporate executioner traveling exceptionally light. Within 20 minutes, Lily and I stood together in the massive echoing foyer. We held one suitcase each. We did not look back at the grand dining room, where we had suffered through years of tense, miserable family dinners. We did not glance at the expensive living room, where Beatrice had constantly criticized my modest upbringing. We simply opened the front door, stepped out into the crisp morning air, and locked the heavy deadbolt behind us. I dropped my set of brass house keys directly into the large ceramic planter on the porch, a silent, definitive symbol of my absolute departure. We walked confidently down the long paved driveway toward my luxury SUV. We held our heads high, our postures perfectly straight. The two aggressive corporate lawyers were sitting in their parked black sedan across the street watching us intently. I could see the profound confusion etched across their faces. They had been sent to conquer a hysterical broken housewife. Instead, they were watching a cold, highly calculated strategic withdrawal. I started the engine, backed out of the driveway, and drove right past their idle vehicle without offering them a single glance. As I navigated the winding suburban roads, moving steadily toward the highway that would take us to the city, the insulated cabin of the car was perfectly quiet. Lily opened her silver iPad, immediately reconnecting to my secure offshore network to monitor the massive data packets waiting to be unleashed. The digital trap was still completely secure. The countdown to Harrison's destruction was progressing flawlessly. The sudden loss of the house was entirely meaningless to us. We were simply changing our tactical position. Suddenly, the sharp ringing of my cell phone shattered the quiet atmosphere. The digital screen on the dashboard illuminated, displaying the name Beatrice. My mother-in-law was calling. I knew exactly why she was reaching out at this precise moment. Harrison had undoubtedly texted her the moment his lawyers confirmed that I was actually vacating the property. Beatrice could never resist the toxic urge to kick someone when they were already down. She thrived on the profound misery of others, feeding her massive ego by constantly reminding everyone of her perceived superiority. I pressed the steering wheel button to accept the call, broadcasting her venomous voice through the car speakers so Lily could hear every single word. "Well, I hear you finally decided to stop being stubborn and actually pack your bags," Beatrice said immediately, her voice dripping with extreme gleeful malice. "Harrison just informed me that you are vacating the premises. It is about time you realized you have absolutely zero power in this situation, Clara. You thought you could disrespect me at the engagement party last night and simply get away with it. This is exactly what happens when you bite the hand that graciously feeds you." I kept my eyes fixed on the highway ahead, my grip on the leather steering wheel relaxed and steady. I am currently driving Beatrice. Did you have a specific reason for this call, or are you just checking to ensure the eviction went smoothly? I am calling to give you a friendly update regarding the property, she replied, her tone practically vibrating with cruel satisfaction. Since you are finally out of the way, I am already coordinating with a team of elite interior designers. We are hiring a crew of premium painters to arrive at the house this afternoon. They are going to completely strip down Lily's old depressing bedroom. We are painting it a beautiful, vibrant shade of pale blue. We are turning that room into a gorgeous new nursery for Leo. Gwen has already picked out the most exquisite imported crib. It is going to be absolutely perfect for my new grandson. Beside me, Lily let out a soft, sharp exhale. The sheer cruelty of Beatrice's statement was staggering. She was actively gloating about erasing her own teenage granddaughter from the family home to make room for her son's illegitimate child. She was brutally weaponizing a child's bedroom to inflict maximum emotional damage. She firmly believed she was delivering the ultimate, crushing blow to my spirit. She thought she was establishing absolute dominance over our broken lives. What Beatrice completely failed to understand was that her vicious words did not hurt me. They completely liberated me. For years I had quietly tolerated her endless stream of toxic insults out of a misguided sense of family duty. I had bitten my tongue to keep the fragile peace. Now, listening to her eagerly plot the erasure of my daughter, every last shred of my restraint permanently vanished. Any tiny, lingering hesitation I might have harbored about destroying her entire financial existence alongside Harrison's was entirely obliterated. She was actively celebrating the exact criminal scheme that would soon leave her entirely penniless and publicly disgraced. That sounds like a very ambitious renovation project, Beatrice, I said, my voice terrifyingly calm and chillingly polite. I sincerely hope you and Gwen enjoy decorating the new nursery. You should definitely make the most of your time in that house over the next 48 hours. What is that supposed to mean? Beatrice snapped, her tone shifting from gleeful gloating to sudden sharp suspicion. Are you threatening my family, Clara? You have absolutely nothing left to threaten us with. You are completely destitute. I am not threatening anyone, Beatrice. I am simply wishing you luck with your upcoming family adjustments, I replied smoothly. Goodbye. I reached forward and pressed the red button on the dashboard, abruptly cutting off her angry, sputtering response. The car returned to a state of perfect, heavy silence. I did not block her number. I wanted her phone lines completely open for tomorrow. When the federal authorities finally exposed that every single dollar funding her precious new nursery had been ruthlessly embezzled from her own hollowed-out retirement accounts, I wanted to be fully available to reject her desperate weeping phone calls. When she finally realized she had fiercely defended the exact man who had systematically robbed her blind. My iron boundaries were now fully secured. There was absolutely no turning back. The toxic family ties were permanently severed, replaced by a cold, calculating drive for absolute justice. I pressed my foot down harder on the accelerator, speeding down the highway toward the towering glass and steel skyline of the city. Behind me lay a broken suburban illusion built entirely on deceit and massive financial fraud. Ahead of me lay the luxurious penthouse suite where my elite legal team was already gathering for war. The second day of our 72-hour countdown was officially underway, and the real slaughter had not even begun. The skyline of Manhattan loomed ahead, a jagged horizon of glass and steel, reflecting the bright midday sun. I navigated the heavy luxury SUV through the dense, chaotic city traffic with perfect practiced ease. We were miles away from the quiet, suffocating suburban streets where Harrison mistakenly thought he had permanently buried my potential. I pulled up to the private entrance of the Four Seasons Hotel. A uniformed valet immediately stepped forward, opening my door with a respectful bow. He recognized the vehicle. He knew exactly who I was. I handed him the keys and guided Lily through the polished glass doors. We bypassed the crowded main lobby completely. I pressed my palm against the biometric scanner hidden beside the private VIP elevator. The heavy brass doors slid open smoothly, and we ascended directly to the top floor. The penthouse suite was not just a luxury hotel room today, it was my primary tactical command center. The elevator doors chimed and parted, revealing the sprawling, multi-level penthouse. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a breathtaking panoramic view of the entire city, placing us physically and metaphorically above the financial district, where Harrison was currently plotting his own demise. The massive dining table had been entirely cleared of its decorative centerpieces. In their place sat secure laptops, towering stacks of financial ledgers, and secure encrypted communication devices. Standing around this makeshift war room were three of the most ruthless, highly compensated corporate attorneys operating on Wall Street. I had retained them months ago using my anonymous corporate holding company. Victor was a fierce corporate litigator known for utterly dismantling fraudulent executives. Grant specialized in complex international asset recovery. Sylvia was a family law shark who had never lost a high-stakes custody battle in her entire prestigious career. They did not see me as Harrison's submissive, plain suburban wife. They saw the anonymous billionaire founder who signed their massive retainer checks. Victor immediately stood up and buttoned his tailored suit jacket as I walked into the room. "Welcome back, Madam CEO," he said, his voice carrying a deep, absolute respect. "Everything is fully prepared and waiting for your final executive review." I took off my coat and tossed it onto a nearby velvet chair. The transformation was instantaneous. The quiet, hesitant posture I had meticulously maintained around my toxic in-laws instantly vanished. I rolled up my sleeves and walked to the head of the heavy mahogany table. I was no longer Clara, the boring document reviewer. I was the chief executive officer of an artificial intelligence empire, and I was stepping onto the battlefield. "Give me the current status report on his domestic accounts," I commanded, leaning forward and placing both hands flat on the table. Grant slid a thick, heavily redacted folder across the polished wood. "Harrison has isolated his liquid capital exactly as your developer predicted," Grant explained quickly. "He believes his domestic assets are entirely shielded from the divorce proceedings because he temporarily transferred them into a blind trust administered by his private equity firm. He intends to reabsorb them the moment the mega merger closes tomorrow." I nodded sharply, my eyes scanning the complicated financial flowcharts. Lily quietly took a seat at the corner of the table, opening her silver iPad and seamlessly integrating her recovered data from Jamal into the lawyer's secure local network. She was the youngest person in the room by 2 decades, but the elite attorneys watched her rapid keystrokes with genuine silent awe. "Let us address the divorce settlement first," I instructed, turning my attention directly to Sylvia. "I want the paperwork completely rewritten today. The garbage document he shoved in my face yesterday is entirely irrelevant now." Sylvia offered a sharp, predatory smile and handed me a freshly printed legal contract. "We have drafted the ultimate $0 exit strategy just as you requested," Clara, she said with intense satisfaction. "This new settlement strips him of absolutely everything. You are claiming full sole legal and physical custody of Lily. You are claiming zero alimony, which legally prevents him from ever seeking spousal support from you once his impending bankruptcy hits. Furthermore, the contract explicitly forces him to assume 100% of the marital debt, including the massive liabilities tied to the shell companies he foolishly tried to hide from the courts." I read through the aggressive, bulletproof clauses. It was a masterpiece of legal destruction. If he signs this, he walks away with literally nothing. He takes all the toxic debt and he completely surrenders his daughter. "He will never sign this under normal circumstances," I noted calmly. Sylvia leaned back, her smile widening. "He will not sign it under normal circumstances," she agreed. "He will sign it under the extreme, terrifying duress of a massive federal raid." Victor stepped forward, placing a massive stack of federal injunctions directly onto the table. "That brings us to the corporate strategy," Victor said, his eyes gleaming with professional anticipation. "As soon as your artificial intelligence verification firm officially fails the collateral tomorrow morning, the merger will instantly collapse. The acquiring megacorporation is legally mandated to report the fraudulent documents to the Securities and Exchange Commission and the Federal Bureau of Investigation. The absolute millisecond that federal raid begins, we strike with these injunctions." He tapped the heavy stack of legal papers. We have drafted emergency ex parte orders. Because Jamal's data proves Harrison embezzled money from his own family members to fund the forgery ring, we can legally freeze all his remaining personal and corporate assets. We are arguing that those funds are the direct proceeds of an ongoing criminal enterprise. He will not be able to access a single penny to hire a criminal defense attorney. We are effectively cutting off his financial oxygen supply the exact second he begins to drown. I looked at the flawless legal traps they had constructed. Harrison was spending his afternoon picking out a custom suit for his grand signing ceremony, blissfully unaware that a highly coordinated team of apex predators was currently dissecting his entire life. The sheer arrogance of his deception had blinded him to his own extreme vulnerability. He firmly believed his high society status made him entirely untouchable. He had no idea his very own wife had bought the executioners who were currently sharpening their axes. Lily tapped my arm, drawing my attention back to her iPad screen. She had successfully cross-referenced the Shell Company data with the injunction documents. Mom, look at Gwen's corporate liability structure, Lily pointed out, her voice calm and analytical. Because Harrison registered her as the sole acting chief executive officer of the forgery ring, the federal authorities will automatically target her personal assets for immediate seizure. When Victor files these injunctions tomorrow, it will not just freeze Harrison's accounts. It will instantly drain every single bank account tied to Gwen. The luxury apartment he rents for her, the expensive sports car, the elite private preschool tuition for Leo. Everything will be completely frozen by the federal government. I nodded slowly, absorbing the absolute totality of the impending devastation. Gwen had gleefully mocked my modest dress at the engagement party last night. She had proudly proclaimed her own inherent superiority, firmly believing her old money pedigree and her status as the favored mistress elevated her high above the consequences of basic morality. Tomorrow, she would brutally discover that her entire luxurious existence was built on heavily forged paper. When the federal agents knocked down her door, her prestigious family name would not protect her from severe wire fraud charges. Sylvia handed me a sleek black pen. I need your signature on the final drafts of the $0 divorce settlement, Clara, she requested gently. Once you sign these, the trap is fully armed. I took the pen and looked around the penthouse war room. The towering glass windows showcased the sprawling, glittering city below us. This was the exact empire I had quietly built through years of relentless hard work, brilliant innovation, and unyielding determination. I had created a massive legacy of truth and verification in a financial world saturated with lies. I pressed the pen firmly against the thick paper and signed my name with bold, aggressive strokes. The hesitant, accommodating housewife was officially dead. The fierce, untouchable chief executive officer had fully taken control of the narrative. I handed the signed documents back to Sylvia. The legal team immediately began sorting the paperwork into heavily classified folders, preparing them for tomorrow's synchronized assault. We have successfully isolated his capital, prepared the absolute asset seizures, and secured the $0 exit strategy Victor announced, organizing the final stack of federal injunctions. We are completely ready for deployment. The only remaining variable is your company's artificial intelligence report. I walked back to my encrypted laptop and opened the secure communication channel with my lead developer. The quarantined failure report was still securely locked in our offline servers, patiently waiting for my final executive command. The counterfeit documents were perfectly processed. The digital guillotine was raised high into the air. I looked at Lily, who offered me a small, confident smile. We had survived the eviction. We had survived the emotional manipulation. Now it was finally time to execute the ultimate reckoning. I locked the secure laptop and turned to face the elite legal team. The strategy is completely locked, I declared, my voice echoing firmly across the luxurious penthouse war room. We will wait for the signing ceremony to officially begin tomorrow morning. The exact moment he picks up his expensive fountain pen to finalize the massive fraudulent merger we strike, we will absolutely destroy his entire arrogant world forever. While I stood in the penthouse suite, planning the ultimate execution of Harrison's fraudulent empire, a different kind of destruction was unfolding across the city. The shockwaves of Harrison's reckless greed were already beginning to tear his toxic family apart. Inside a lavish apartment on the Upper East Side, Jamal stood perfectly still in his home office. He was staring intensely at the glowing monitor of his personal computer. The brilliant risk manager had spent his morning verifying the catastrophic financial data he secretly handed me the night before. He wanted to be absolutely certain before confronting his wife. He had double-checked every offshore transfer, tracking the stolen funds as they flowed directly from Meredith's irrevocable trust account into Gwen's illegal shell company. The numbers did not lie. Harrison had bankrupted his own sister. Jamal printed the damning financial reports, the crisp white pages, feeling incredibly heavy in his large hands. He took a deep breath and walked down the long hallway toward the main living room. He found Meredith sitting casually on a plush designer sofa. She held a crystal glass of expensive white wine, deeply absorbed in scrolling through social media on her phone. She looked entirely relaxed, completely oblivious to the massive financial hurricane rapidly approaching her curated life. Jamal walked over and placed the thick stack of printed financial reports onto the glass coffee table directly in front of her. Meredith barely looked up from her bright digital screen. "What is this, Jamal?" she asked, her voice laced with the signature aristocratic annoyance she frequently used whenever he interrupted her leisure time. "I am busy reviewing the catering menu for Harrison's victory dinner tomorrow night. Beatrice wants everything to be absolutely perfect for Gwen and little Leo." Jamal did not flinch at the cruel mention of Harrison's secret family. He tapped his finger firmly against the top page of the printed financial documents. "I need you to put the phone down and look at these bank statements right now, Meredith," Jamal said, his deep voice radiating heavy, undeniable authority. "I have conducted a thorough risk assessment of your personal trust fund and Beatrice's primary retirement accounts. You need to brace yourself. Harrison has been systematically embezzling your money for the past 2 years." Meredith froze. She slowly lowered her phone, her perfectly manicured eyebrows drawing together in a deep frown of absolute disbelief. She looked at the papers, then back up at her husband, letting out a sharp, dismissive laugh. "What on earth are you talking about?" she demanded, taking a slow, arrogant sip of her wine. "Harrison is a highly successful private equity director. He is closing a massive $500 million merger tomorrow morning. Why would he ever need to touch my trust fund? He is about to become a billionaire." Jamal kept his posture perfectly straight, refusing to back down from her aggressive tone. "Because he needed massive amounts of untraceable liquid cash to secretly fund a highly illegal corporate forgery operation," Jamal explained with cold, clinical precision. "He completely liquidated your grandfather's irrevocable trust. He aggressively leveraged your inherited assets as hidden collateral for highly toxic offshore loans." "Meredith, the money is entirely gone. Your brother stole every single penny you own to finance his mistress's fake historical document portfolio." Meredith slammed her crystal wine glass onto the glass table. The expensive liquid splashed over the rim, soaking into the financial reports. She stood up abruptly, her face flushing with anger. "How dare you accuse my brother of being a common thief?" she hissed fiercely, pointing directly at Jamal's chest. "You have absolutely no idea what you are looking at. You are just a paranoid risk manager who sees imaginary disasters everywhere." Jamal remained perfectly calm, his dark eyes filled with a heavy sadness. He had desperately tried to save her from the sinking ship. He had offered her the undeniable truth on a silver platter. But Meredith was completely blinded by her absolute loyalty to her toxic bloodline. She was so deeply indoctrinated into Beatrice's snobbish mindset that she would rather defend a criminal brother than listen to her own brilliant husband. "You simply do not understand how family money actually works," Jamal Meredith stated loudly, her voice dripping with extreme condescension. She was actively wielding her old money pedigree like a blunt weapon, intentionally attacking his background. "Our family utilizes highly sophisticated financial strategies that go far beyond your basic corporate risk assessments. Harrison is a financial genius. He is aggressively growing our family wealth using elite tactics you could never possibly comprehend." You are just incredibly jealous of his massive success because you will never truly belong in our world." Her brutal words hung heavily in the quiet air. She had finally said the quiet part out loud. Despite his massive corporate salary and his brilliant mind, she still viewed him as an inherent outsider. She truly believed her wealthy white criminal brother was fundamentally superior to her successful, honest African American husband. Jamal did not yell. He did not argue. He simply looked at the woman he had married, finally seeing her, with absolute, unfiltered clarity. The heavy blinders were permanently removed. He realized in that exact moment that Meredith was entirely beyond saving. She was actively choosing to sink with her toxic family. "I understand perfectly," Meredith Jamal said, his deep voice remarkably soft and chillingly resolute. "I understand exactly who you are, and I understand exactly what this marriage has always been to you." He turned around and walked calmly into their master bedroom. He pulled a sleek leather duffel bag from the closet and began meticulously packing his clothes. He did not pack everything. He only took what he absolutely needed to execute a clean, highly efficient tactical withdrawal. Meredith followed him into the bedroom. Her arms crossed defensively over her chest, a smug, triumphant smile playing on her lips. She foolishly believed she had successfully won the argument by putting him in his proper place. "Are you seriously throwing a pathetic temper tantrum and running away?" she mocked loudly, leaning casually against the doorframe. "You will be calling me and begging to come back by tomorrow evening, right after Harrison officially signs his massive billionaire contract." Jamal zipped his leather duffel bag shut with a sharp, decisive pull. He hoisted the heavy bag over his broad shoulder and walked straight toward her. Meredith instinctively stepped aside as he passed through the doorway. "I will not be calling you tomorrow," Meredith Jamal said, stopping briefly in the grand foyer to look back at her one final time. "Because tomorrow afternoon, when the federal authorities officially freeze every single bank account tied to your brother's fraudulent corporate merger, you will suddenly realize that your precious family money is completely gone. You will be entirely bankrupt, and you will face that brutal reality completely alone." He opened the heavy front door and walked out into the hallway, firmly closing it behind him. The decisive click of the lock echoed loudly, finalizing his absolute detachment from the rapidly imploding family. Jamal was officially free, leaving Meredith standing alone in her luxurious apartment, oblivious to the catastrophic financial execution awaiting her in the morning. Back in the secure penthouse suite of the Four Seasons, the golden sunlight began to fade into a deep, vibrant twilight. The massive city below transformed into a brilliant sea of electric lights. I stood by the towering glass windows, holding a hot cup of black coffee, watching the bustling metropolis thrive. The elite legal team had successfully departed hours ago, their heavy leather briefcases fully loaded with the weaponized federal injunctions and the finalized $0 divorce settlement. Lily was sitting comfortably on the plush velvet sofa, typing complex code strings into her encrypted iPad, maintaining a continuous overwatch on Harrison's compromised home network. Everything was perfectly aligned. The trap was meticulously set. We just needed to patiently wait for the sun to rise. Suddenly, the quiet atmosphere of the luxury suite was sharply broken by the loud vibration of my cell phone resting on the marble counter. I walked over and picked up the device. The bright screen illuminated, displaying a new text message directly from Harrison. I opened the notification, keeping my facial expression perfectly blank and terrifyingly calm. It was a high-resolution staged photograph. Harrison was standing confidently in front of a massive gilded mirror inside an incredibly expensive designer boutique. He was wearing a custom-tailored, immaculate Tom Ford suit, the dark fabric clinging perfectly to his broad shoulders. He looked incredibly smug, radiating the blinding arrogance of a man who firmly believed he had conquered the financial world. He was proudly showcasing the exact armor he intended to wear to his grand signing ceremony tomorrow morning. Beneath the arrogant photograph, he had typed a short, brutally aggressive message designed to inflict maximum intimidation. "Your time is up. Sign the papers or I leave you with nothing." Or, i.e., I stared at the glowing screen of my phone, reading his arrogant ultimatum. Harrison truly believed those words. He was intoxicated by his own manufactured power, posing in his expensive custom suit, absolutely certain he held my entire future in his manicured hands. I did not reply. Silence was the sharpest weapon I could wield right now. It would let his imagination run wild, leaving him to wonder if I was weeping in a cheap motel or scrambling to find a budget lawyer. I placed the phone on the marble counter and walked over to where my daughter was sitting. The massive floor-to-ceiling windows of the penthouse suite cast a soft glow over the room, but the brightest light came from the dual monitors Lily had set up on the dining table. She had connected her silver iPad to my encrypted laptop, creating a highly secure command center. Her fingers flew across the keyboard with breathtaking speed. She was actively compiling the financial evidence Jamal had provided us. "What is the current status of the data distribution protocol?" I asked, standing behind her chair and looking at the lines of code. Lily did not pause her rapid typing. "The payload is perfectly synthesized," she replied, her voice reflecting a cold, analytical focus that made me proud. "I have extracted every single bank statement, every forged invoice from Gwen's shell company, and every illegal wire transfer record showing how he drained his mother's retirement accounts. I am building a highly encrypted mass email blast. We cannot rely on the federal authorities to notify the victims. We need absolute public exposure." I watched as she populated the blind carbon copy recipient list. It was a masterpiece of targeted destruction. The first block of email addresses belonged to the executive board of directors at the acquiring megacorporation. The second block was directed to the Senior Enforcement Division of the Securities and Exchange Commission. The final block was the most personal. It contained the private email addresses of every member of Harrison's toxic family, including Beatrice and Meredith. "I want them to see the exact moment their golden child bankrupted their entire bloodline," Lily stated firmly, highlighting the family contact list. "I have set a delayed execution timer on the encrypted server. The system will hold the massive data packet in a secure digital vault overnight. Tomorrow morning at 10:15, 15 minutes after his grand signing ceremony officially begins, the server will automatically blast the unredacted financial evidence to every person on this list. There is no way to stop it once the countdown starts." I placed my hand gently on her shoulder, feeling a profound wave of respect for the brilliant, resilient young woman she was becoming. She had survived the loss of her childhood home and the cruel betrayal of her father, transforming her pain into a perfectly calibrated instrument of justice. The digital bombs were now securely planted beneath the foundation of Harrison's fraudulent empire. "Lock the timer," I instructed smoothly. "Let us move on to the final verification phase. I need to speak with the lead auditor." Lily quickly secured the mass email protocol and minimized the command window. She opened a highly restricted video conferencing application. This was the secure channel my artificial intelligence company utilized exclusively for extreme corporate emergencies. I sat down in the heavy leather chair directly in front of the high-definition camera. I smoothed the lapels of my navy blue dress and took a deep, steadying breath. I was shifting gears from a betrayed wife to the anonymous billionaire chief executive officer of the global financial industry's most trusted verification firm. Lily initiated the secure connection. The screen flickered briefly before resolving into a crystal-clear image of a severe gray-haired man sitting in a stark wood-paneled boardroom. It was the compliance auditor for the acquiring megacorporation. He was a man famous on Wall Street for destroying corrupt executives and dismantling toxic corporate mergers. "Madam Founder," the lead auditor said, his voice echoing with deep formal respect. He adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses, leaning closer to his camera. "I apologize for requesting this emergency briefing, but my compliance team is alarmed by the preliminary warnings your secure server generated. We are scheduled to finalize the $500 million merger with the private equity firm tomorrow morning. We urgently need your final definitive executive ruling on the historical collateral portfolio they submitted for verification." I kept my posture perfectly rigid and my facial expression completely unreadable. My tone was cold, sharp, and dripping with absolute authority. "I appreciate your diligence in observing the mandatory compliance protocols," I began smoothly. My proprietary artificial intelligence system has completed a comprehensive microscopic forensic analysis of the entire document collection submitted by the acquiring firm. The system analyzed paper fiber degradation, ink chemical composition, and signature pressure metrics against our global historical database. I paused deliberately, letting the heavy weight of my impending words settle into the digital space between us. I am officially confirming that the preliminary warnings are entirely accurate, I stated, my voice cutting through the quiet penthouse suite like a sharp blade. The entire collateral portfolio is a massive, highly coordinated fabrication. Every single document is a modern forgery. The collection is entirely worthless. The lead auditor visibly paled on the screen. The color completely drained from his face as the sheer magnitude of the catastrophic fraud washed over him. A $500 million merger was actively being secured by fake, artificially aged paper. The legal and financial implications for his corporation were absolutely staggering. "My God," he whispered, pulling a linen handkerchief from his pocket and dabbing at his sweating forehead. "The sheer audacity of this deception is unprecedented. If we had signed that contract tomorrow, the liability would have destroyed our quarterly earnings and triggered a federal investigation into our own compliance division. You have saved this corporation from a monumental disaster, Madam Founder." The auditor quickly regained his professional composure. His eyes narrowed with cold corporate fury. "This is a calculated attempt to defraud our corporation on a massive federal scale. We cannot simply walk away from this breach. We are legally obligated to retaliate with absolute, overwhelming force. I have my aggressive legal team standing by on a secure line. We are prepared to notify the federal authorities and terminate the merger contract tonight. We will send a formal cancellation notice to his private equity firm before midnight. The crisis will be quietly contained before the market opens tomorrow." I listened to his frantic, highly logical corporate strategy. Terminating the deal quietly tonight was the expected business procedure. It would effectively save his corporation from financial ruin and smoothly hand Harrison over to the federal authorities in the dark. But it would ruin the spectacular, highly public execution I had meticulously designed. Harrison desperately needed to be utterly humiliated in front of his elite peers, his snobbish family, and the eager financial press. A quiet midnight cancellation was entirely unacceptable. I raised my hand slightly to halt his barrage of corporate countermeasures. "You will not terminate the merger contract tonight. You will not send a single cancellation notice to his private equity firm, and you will absolutely not alert his legal team to our explosive findings." The lead auditor stopped talking immediately, his face twisting into a mask of profound confusion. He stared at me through the high-definition camera, desperately trying to comprehend my unorthodox executive directive. "I do not understand, Madam Founder," he stammered, his voice laced with sudden anxiety. "Standard corporate protocol dictates immediate termination to mitigate public relations damage. If we allow this fraudulent deal to proceed to the signing ceremony tomorrow, the financial press will be present. The exposure will be massive. Why on earth would we intentionally walk directly into a highly publicized corporate ambush?" I leaned closer to the camera, my eyes locking fiercely onto his. My expression was terrifyingly calm, radiating an icy, lethal confidence that demanded absolute obedience. Because standard corporate protocol does not apply to a fraud of this breathtaking magnitude. I explained, my voice dropping to a low, commanding register. This arrogant individual deliberately attempted to use your prestigious corporation to launder $500 million through a criminal shell company. He firmly believes you are too foolish and eager to catch his sophisticated deception. If you quietly cancel the deal tonight, he will simply spin a false narrative to his elite investors and slip away into the shadows. He must be made a permanent, highly visible example to the global financial sector. You will proceed with the grand signing ceremony as scheduled. You will let him sit at that table surrounded by his family and the flashing cameras. I stared directly into the digital lens, delivering my final irreversible executive order. Print the AI report. Bring it to the signing table tomorrow at 10 a.m. Do not let him know until the cameras are flashing. The morning of the third day broke with brilliant sunshine pouring through the towering glass windows of the penthouse suite. The massive city below looked vibrant and entirely oblivious to the monumental financial execution about to take place within its glittering borders. I stood in front of the tall mirror adjusting the collar of my immaculate white power suit. The soft, accommodating suburban wife was gone forever, replaced entirely by a ruthless corporate sovereign preparing to reclaim her stolen kingdom. I checked my luxury watch. It was exactly 8 in the morning. In 90 minutes, the grand ballroom would be packed. The Waldorf Astoria would soon overflow with greedy investors, eager journalists, and a toxic family blindly celebrating their own total destruction. Lily stood beside me, wearing a sharp navy blazer, holding her encrypted iPad securely against her chest. We did not exchange any words of encouragement. We were perfectly synchronized, operating with cold, lethal precision. We took a private, heavily tinted car from the Four Seasons directly to the event. We did not enter through the main lobby. Using my vast corporate connections, I had arranged for absolute undetected access through the secure service elevators, bringing us up very fast. We stepped onto a private velvet-draped balcony that perfectly overlooked the massive ballroom. I stood in the deep shadows looking down at the magnificent stage set for Harrison's ultimate demise. The grand ballroom was a breathtaking spectacle of excessive corporate wealth. Massive crystal chandeliers hung from the ornate gold-leafed ceiling, casting a warm, expensive glow over the hundreds of people gathering below. Dozens of rows of plush chairs were quickly filling with wealthy shareholders, elite investment bankers, and high society socialites desperate to witness the creation of a new billionaire. A long, polished mahogany table sat waiting quietly. The table dominated the front of the massive room, flanked by heavy silk banners bearing the logos of the two merging financial titans. A literal wall of media cameras and aggressive financial journalists formed a restless barricade at the back of the room, ready to broadcast the massive $500 million merger to the entire global market. At precisely 9:30 in the morning, the heavy wooden doors at the back of the ballroom swung open. A sudden electric buzz rippled through the massive crowd. Harrison made his grand entrance, and the aggressive flashing of press cameras instantly illuminated. The room lit up like a violent lightning storm. He looked absolutely radiant, practically glowing with the toxic, blinding arrogance of a man who firmly believed he had conquered the entire universe. He was wearing the exact custom-tailored suit he had maliciously texted me a picture of the night before. His broad shoulders were back, his chin tilted upward in an expression of supreme, unadulterated entitlement. He was strutting down the center aisle like a conquering emperor, entirely unaware that he was actually marching straight to the guillotine. But the absolute height of his breathtaking audacity was her. The woman walking proudly by his side was the ultimate insult. Gwen was holding tightly to his left arm, wearing a spectacular, incredibly expensive scarlet designer gown that hugged her figure perfectly. She was actively posing for the flashing cameras, flashing a brilliant, perfectly whitened smile. Holding her other hand was little Leo, dressed in a miniature matching suit. As they reached the front of the room, a bold financial journalist shouted a question over the loud murmur of the crowd, asking about the beautiful woman accompanying the soon-to-be billionaire. Harrison stopped and turned smoothly toward the cameras. He offered a highly practiced, charismatic smile and pulled Gwen slightly closer to his side. "This brilliant woman is my new strategic partner," he announced loudly, his confident voice projecting clearly across the crowded ballroom. "She has been absolutely instrumental in helping me secure the rare historical collateral portfolio that made this massive merger possible. She is the vital future of my private equity firm." I stood perfectly still in the dark balcony above them, feeling a cold, dark amusement wash over my entire body. He was publicly crediting his mistress with the very fraud that would completely ruin them. He was actively cementing her legal liability in front of dozens of rolling news cameras. It was a masterclass in self-destruction, and he was gleefully pulling the trigger himself. My gaze shifted slightly to the right, landing on the two women sitting in the prestigious front row. The seats were reserved strictly for immediate family. Beatrice and Meredith were absolutely glowing in the bright spotlight. My toxic mother-in-law was wearing a custom suit and a massive diamond necklace that caught the chandelier light with every arrogant movement of her head. Meredith sat beside her looking deeply smug. She was draped in expensive silk crossing her legs and casting haughty, superior glances at the lesser investors seated behind them. They were aggressively soaking up the massive public attention, fiercely proud of their golden child. They looked so incredibly smug, so utterly convinced of their absolute financial superiority. They were clapping loudly as Harrison introduced Gwen to the press, completely embracing the mistress who had helped destroy my marriage. They were openly celebrating the woman who was currently wearing their stolen money. They had absolutely no idea that their massive trust funds and secure retirement accounts were completely empty. They had no idea that the expensive designer clothes they were wearing right now were effectively the last valuable assets they would ever own. The sheer delicious irony of their arrogant celebration was almost intoxicating. They were happily applauding the exact criminal scheme that had already bankrupted their entire bloodline. The digital clock on my phone ticked forward. It was 9:45. The loud, overlapping chatter in the grand ballroom began to slowly quiet down as the primary executives moved into their designated positions. The heavy mahogany table at the front of the room was perfectly and fully prepared. Two thick, leather-bound contract binders rested perfectly in the center, waiting for the final binding signatures. The acquiring chief executive officer walked onto the main stage from a side door. He was a tall, imposing man with silver hair and a notoriously ruthless reputation in the global financial sector. I had spoken to him securely just last night. I watched his face closely as he approached the mahogany table. His expression was a flawless mask of professional courtesy, giving absolutely nothing away. To the untrained eye, he looked like a man ready to finalize a highly profitable business acquisition. But I knew exactly what he was carrying inside his slim leather briefcase. I knew he was holding the printed artificial intelligence verification report that proved Harrison's entire historical portfolio was a massive, completely worthless forgery. He set his leather briefcase down next to his chair and buttoned his suit jacket. He did not look up at the balcony. He did not give a single visual cue to indicate the catastrophic ambush waiting just moments away. He simply took his seat at the right side of the polished mahogany table and folded his large hands together, waiting very patiently now. He was waiting for the grand spectacle to unfold. The tension in the massive ballroom grew incredibly thick, charging the air with a heavy electric anticipation. The financial journalists checked their audio recorders. The wealthy shareholders leaned forward in their plush seats. Beatrice sat up perfectly straight, fixing her rigid posture for the cameras. Meredith pulled out her expensive phone to carefully record her brother's glorious triumph. Harrison stepped onto the stage, leaving Gwen and Leo smiling proudly in the front row. He confidently approached the left side of the long mahogany table, looking out at the massive, eager crowd. He was soaking in the breathless silence of hundreds of powerful people waiting for his final bold move. He offered the acquiring chief executive officer a firm, aggressively confident handshake. The older man accepted the gesture smoothly, his grip tight, his face betraying absolutely no hint of knowledge. The terrible, devastating knowledge he held remained perfectly hidden behind his corporate smile. Harrison sat down in the heavy leather chair, feeling completely invincible. He reached into the inner pocket of his custom suit jacket and pulled out a thick, heavy gold fountain pen. It was the exact pen he always wanted. His late father had given him the pen when he first graduated from his elite business school. He always claimed he would use it to legally sign his very first billion-dollar contract. He unscrewed the gold cap with a slow, highly theatrical flourish, placing it carefully on the polished wood surface. The entire ballroom fell dead silent. You could hear a pin drop in the massive decorated space. The quiet hum of the ventilation system was the only sound breaking the absolute complete stillness. Every single camera lens was aimed directly at the heavy paper contract, resting securely waiting. The sharp tip of the heavy gold fountain pen hovered just a fraction of an inch above the thick signature line. Harrison took a deep theatrical breath, savoring the absolute pinnacle of his entire existence. He pressed the golden nib against the crisp white paper. Before the dark ink could form the very first letter of his name, a loud, booming crash shattered the breathless silence of the grand ballroom. The massive, heavy mahogany doors at the back of the room swung open with such violent force that they slammed against the marble walls. A collective gasp rippled through the hundreds of wealthy guests, shareholders, and aggressive financial journalists. Every single head in the room instantly turned away from the stage to look at the sudden disturbance. I stepped confidently through the wide doorway, leaving the dark shadows of the balcony far behind. I was wearing an immaculate tailored white power suit that radiated sheer cold-blooded authority. I did not look like a defeated suburban housewife. I looked like an apex predator stepping onto my rightful hunting ground. Flanking me in a tight, impenetrable V formation were my three high-powered Wall Street attorneys, Victor Grant and Sylvia. Marching directly behind them was a highly intimidating squad of federal financial auditors carrying heavy locked briefcases. We moved down the center aisle with a synchronized lethal precision. The crowd of elite socialites and aggressive reporters instinctively parted before us, stepping back to clear a wide path. They could physically feel the massive wave of absolute destruction radiating from our group. I kept my eyes locked entirely on the man sitting at the long mahogany table. Harrison dropped his expensive gold pen. It clattered loudly against the polished wood surface, all the blood completely drained from his perfectly tanned face, leaving him a sickening ashen gray. His initial look of profound shock rapidly morphed into a mask of pure, unadulterated panic. He scrambled to his feet, knocking his heavy leather chair backward. He grabbed the microphone resting on the table, his knuckles turning stark white from his desperate white-knuckled grip. "Security!" Harrison shouted, his voice cracking with a frantic, highly unprofessional pitch that echoed awkwardly through the massive ballroom. "I need security in here immediately. Remove this woman from the premises right now. She is my hysterical soon-to-be ex-wife. She is having a severe mental breakdown and attempting to ruin a private corporate event. Remove her instantly." Four large security guards in dark suits immediately stepped forward from the edges of the room, moving aggressively to intercept my elite legal team. Beatrice stood up from her prestigious front row seat, her face twisted in an ugly sneer of absolute outrage. She pointed her heavily jeweled finger at me, shouting at the guards to hurry up and drag the pathetic trash out of the hotel. Meredith joined her mother, yelling insults that were quickly drowned out by the rising murmur of the confused, wealthy crowd. I did not break my stride. I did not even look at the security guards rushing toward me. I knew I did not have to. The acquiring chief executive officer, the silver-haired titan of the financial industry, calmly stood up from his chair at the mahogany table. He raised his large hand in a single sharp gesture of absolute command. "Halt!" The acquiring chief executive officer ordered, his deep, resonant voice booming through his own microphone. The imposing security guards froze instantly in their tracks, recognizing the ultimate authority in the room. The silver-haired executive casually buttoned his expensive suit jacket. He walked slowly around the massive mahogany table, ignoring a sputtering, heavily hyperventilating Harrison completely. He stepped down from the elevated stage and walked directly toward me, meeting me exactly in the center of the grand ballroom. The entire room fell into a stunned, suffocating silence. The aggressive flashing of the press cameras momentarily stopped. Everyone watched in absolute bewilderment as one of the most powerful, ruthless men on Wall Street stopped 2 feet in front of me. He did not ask security to remove me. Instead, he respectfully bowed his head, offering me a gesture of deep, genuine professional reverence. "Welcome, Madam Founder," he said clearly into his lapel microphone, ensuring the title echoed loudly off the crystal chandeliers. "It is an absolute honor to finally meet the brilliant architect behind our industry's most vital security infrastructure." A collective, deafening gasp erupted from the hundreds of elite guests. The aggressive journalists immediately raised their heavy cameras, the rapid firing of camera shutters sounding like a massive swarm of furious locusts. Harrison stumbled backward on the stage, his legs hitting the edge of the mahogany table. His brain was violently short-circuiting. He looked wildly from the bowing executive to my immaculate white suit, desperately trying to comprehend an impossible reality. Clara Harrison gasped weakly, his arrogant facade completely shattering into a million pathetic pieces. "What is this? What are you doing?" I walked past the bowing executive and confidently climbed the short stairs onto the main stage. I stood directly in front of the massive mahogany table looking down at my trembling, terrified husband. I did not raise my voice. I did not yell. I simply picked up the microphone he had abandoned. "I am officially terminating this merger," I announced, my cold, measured voice slicing through the chaotic murmurs of the stunned crowd. I raised my hand and snapped my fingers. At the back of the room, my lead developer executed the final command. The massive silk banners bearing the corporate logos instantly dropped from the giant presentation screens behind the stage. In their place, a brilliantly bright, highly detailed digital document illuminated the entire ballroom. The header of the document clearly displayed the elite logo of Veritech Archival Solutions, my artificial intelligence company. The massive red letters stamped across the center of the screen read, "100% counterfeit." The collateral portfolio Harrison submitted to secure this $500 million merger is entirely fraudulent, I explained to the breathless room. The 18th century paper was artificially aged. The historical ink is composed of modern synthetic polymers. He used a shadow corporation to aggressively manufacture fake historical assets to commit federal wire fraud. I clicked a remote in my hand, and the massive screen shifted to display Gwen's corporate registration documents. And the sole acting chief executive officer of that illegal forgery ring is sitting right there in the front row. I pointed directly at Gwen. The crowd gasped loudly, turning to stare at the mistress in the scarlet dress. Gwen's face turned a sickly shade of white. She instinctively clutched little Leo to her chest, her eyes darting frantically around the room looking for an exit. Harrison dropped to his knees behind the heavy mahogany table, his breathing coming in shallow, ragged gasps. He was watching his entire glorious billionaire future actively disintegrate into a horrifying federal nightmare. But the absolute devastation of his life was not completely finished. I glanced down at the sleek luxury watch on my wrist. It was exactly 10:15 in the morning. I looked up to the dark balcony where my daughter Lily was silently managing the encrypted servers. The delayed execution timer had just reached 0. Suddenly, a sharp, synchronized wave of electronic chiming echoed across the massive ballroom. Hundreds of cell phones vibrated and beeped simultaneously. The mass email blast had successfully breached the secure inboxes of the acquiring board of directors, the federal regulators, and Harrison's entire toxic family. Beatrice and Meredith aggressively snatched their expensive phones from their designer purses, annoyed by the sudden interruption. I watched their faces with intense, cold satisfaction. Beatrice read the first line of the heavily documented financial report. The expensive phone slipped from her trembling fingers and shattered on the hard marble floor. Meredith let out a high-pitched, guttural scream of absolute horror as she saw her completely empty trust fund balance. Their massive inheritance, their secure retirement, their entire arrogant identity was officially gone. They were entirely bankrupt. Chaos completely erupted in the grand ballroom. The elite shareholders began shouting angrily. The journalists pushed forward, shouting rapid questions. Gwen jumped up from her front row seat, abandoning her expensive purse. She frantically tried to flee the stage, dragging a crying Leo toward the side exit, desperate to escape her impending federal indictment. As the room descended into total unmitigated pandemonium, a new terrifying sound pierced the heavy glass windows of the luxury hotel. The loud, aggressive, and highly intimidating wail of numerous federal police sirens echoed sharply from the busy city streets below. A massive fleet of heavily armed Federal Bureau of Investigation tactical vehicles was rapidly pulling up directly to the main entrance of the Grand Waldorf Astoria Hotel, signaling his absolute doom. The massive trap had flawlessly snapped shut, crushing his criminal ambitions entirely. I stood tall and completely victorious in the center of the total beautiful chaos. The heavy ballroom doors flew open again this time, admitting a swarm of federal agents in tactical gear. They moved with absolute precision, cutting straight through the frantic crowd of investors and journalists. Harrison did not fight them, as the cold steel handcuffs clicked sharply around his wrists. The blinding flash of dozens of press cameras captured the exact moment his entire existence shattered. He was losing his elite career, his arrogant reputation, and his freedom in one humiliating sweep. Gwen sobbed uncontrollably as agents escorted her away, sealing her fate. Her federal forgery charges would soon strip her of custody, sending little Leo to live with her estranged parents. Amidst the deafening roar of shouting reporters and corporate panic, I walked calmly up to Harrison. I slid the $0 divorce settlement across the mahogany table. I offered him a single freezing look. Sign it, or I let my lawyers completely dismantle whatever tiny scraps of your life remain. Terrified, broken, and weeping, Harrison awkwardly grasped a cheap plastic pen with his cuffed hands and signed his rights away forever. 6 months later, the brutal reality of their choices had permanently settled. I was walking out of my towering corporate headquarters when I spotted them shivering near the revolving glass doors. Beatrice and Meredith stood in the freezing rain, wearing faded coats, looking absolutely pathetic. They had lost their luxurious homes and their elite social standing. When Beatrice saw me, she stepped forward, desperately begging for financial mercy and a second chance. I did not break my stride. I looked straight ahead and walked past them without offering a single glance or a solitary word. Absolute unbreakable silence was the only response they deserved. I stepped into my waiting car, where Jamal was already reviewing our quarterly financial reports. I had hired him as the chief risk officer for my artificial intelligence empire. His brilliant mind was finally being respected and properly compensated, completely free from the toxic family that had constantly marginalized him. That evening, Lily and I stood together on the sprawling terrace of our new private estate. We watched the sunset paint the sky in brilliant shades of gold and purple. The nightmare was officially over, replaced by a legacy I was immensely proud to build. Using a fraction of my corporate wealth, I had launched a massive international foundation. We actively funded advanced technology education for brilliant young women and provided ironclad legal support for victims escaping severe financial abuse. I wrapped my arm around my daughter's shoulders, knowing she would grow up understanding her absolute worth. You must never shrink yourself to fit a toxic narrative constructed by small-minded people. When they try to convince you that you are weak, you must silently forge your strength in the dark. Always build your own safety net, and never apologize for the fire you use to burn their lies to the ground. This is your true story now. Take absolute control of your life forever.